guests and members of the public, both here and watching on webcast, to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Committee. Our main item of business today is a question and answer session with Mopac, the Mayor's Office on Policing and Crime, and the Metropolitan Police Service. But first, we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we begin this discussion. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the meeting discussion using hashtag Assembly Police and hashtag Police Question and Answer. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence and Chair's announcements. Can I ask our clerk, Teresa Young, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting?
Thank you. Apologies have been received from the committee's chairman, Steve O'Connell.
And lateness? And
lateness from Assembly Member Whittle.
Okay. Declarations of interest. Again, can I ask you, Ms. Young? Can I ask the committee, no declarations of interest?
If anyone has any additional.
Can I ask the committee to note out the recommendations set at item 2?
Yep.
Noted.
Fine. We dealt with the issue of interest, so and the recommendations, just for the information of the public, are set out in the agenda. Noting the list of offices held by Assembly members, noting the declarations by members of any disclosable pecuniary interest, and noting the declaration by members of any other interest deemed to be relevant to today's meeting. If I can move on to agenda item 3, minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the Police and Crime Committee held on the 5th of September 2018 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 4, summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from the previous meetings of the committee and additional correspondence as listed in the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, responses to the committee's report, A Long Way From Home, Improving London's Response to Women in the Criminal Justice System. Can I ask the committee to note the responses from the Mayor and the MPs to a report?
No, agreed.
Thank you. If I can now move to the main part of the agenda, which is a question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. Welcome to Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, and the Metropolitan Police Service. Welcome to Sir Craig Mackey, Deputy Commissioner, and Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu. We have a set of questions around a number of issues. One set of questions has been withdrawn around women in the criminal justice system, but in light of recent events, in particular the Westminster inquest, can I invite you, Sir Craig, to make a statement, and then members may have some questions or Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, and members may have some questions to follow from your statement. We're also grateful for the written statement that you provided to us, which was given to us just before the start of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will make a statement. I'll just caveat it by, as we sit here, a jury has been sworn in for part 2 of the inquest into the shooting of Khalid Masood. So in terms of answering questions, I'm somewhat limited by what I can say. I would say exactly what we said yesterday. It is the Metropolitan Police's position that all of our thoughts, and certainly everyone who works for me, are with the families and the victims of that terrible attack on the 22nd of March last year. It was the first of a series of attacks. This is the first inquest, and part 1 finished yesterday. And the dignity and sheer resilience of all the family members involved was unbelievable for the 4 weeks of that first part of the inquest, and they have demonstrated that absolutely throughout. I said it yesterday, we unreservedly accept the coroner's conclusions. The chief coroner should be commended for what was a incredibly rigorous and examination of the entire process. I'll read what he said. He said, due to the shortcomings in the security system at New Palace Yard, including the supervision of those engaged in such duties, the armed officers were not aware of the requirement to remain in close proximity to the gates. Had they been stationed there, it is possible that they may have been able to prevent PC Palmer suffering fatal injuries. Yesterday I said the merest possibility that we could have prevented Khalid Masood murdering Keith Palmer is a matter of huge regret, and the Metropolitan Police is deeply sorry. And to the family of PC Keith Palmer, I repeat that apology today. We still await the detailed narrative from the Chief Coroner in terms of why Article 2 was engaged in this inquiry. but we do accept his conclusions around the failings of supervision. But as I said, we do await his detailed narrative. To go further in terms of the Metropolitan Police position about what it has done as a result of Khalid Massoud's act last year, the reviews into parliamentary security have been extensive. We, of course, did not wait for the inquest before we put those reviews into place. Sir John Murphy was also brought in by Parliament to look at security in the parliamentary estate. We have taken his report very seriously. In fact, Sir John has been back to look at what we have done. We have disclosed that to the Chief Coroner. We can't disclose it in a public forum because it clearly contains matters of national security. But there has been extensive work put in place after Keith Palmer's murder to make sure that we are properly protecting both the public, our seat of democracy, and of course our officers who work within that environment. There were a number of other issues raised at the inquest which did not engage Article 2. I wasn't going to cover those today. You may have questions on them, but one of them, which is pertinent to all of our officers, was the issue of body armour, and that was dealt with during the inquest. It did not engage Article 2. The body armour that is currently worn by police officers in this country is effective, but it's only effective where it covers, where it covers you. And where Keith was murdered, the body armour was not engaged. And unfortunately, in order to protect somebody entirely, and there is body armour available to the military, it would be completely inappropriate for a police officer to wear. You simply would not be able to function as a police officer if you were wearing that kind of body armour. Expert evidence was called. There is work trying to find the next generation that will help better protect our officers, but the current armour is the best that we've got. So I thought I would make that point, as it hasn't really been made publicly since.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner Basu, Craig, have you got anything to add?
No, I think that's covered it.
Well, I believe a couple of members may have questions, so can I bring you in, Assistant Medicinal?
Thanks for that, Neil. I mean, I think it's important to remember that the murder was actually committed by Massoud, whatever the failings may or may not be of the Met and anybody else, and he's the one responsible for the death. The question I was going to ask, though, was that at the inquest, Commander Usher had to apologise for giving misleading information to the inquest, and I just wondered if you could say how that came about.
He was commenting on, Commander Usher faced, I think, somewhere in the region of 10 hours of incredibly intensive questioning. I think our counsel described it as pitiless. At one point, he gave a very fulsome account of all of our security procedures, policies and processes. He was questioned on a particular piece of detail. On that detail, he was uncertain. He gave an answer. He was required to come back and talk about that answer later on. He had been shown many thousands of documents during his preparation for his evidence. One of those documents was effectively a piece of paper which was part of a supervision system that was in place by a particular inspector. That was found very late in the day. It's one of those perfect storms. That inspector was on paternity leave for an extended period of time. The supervision system he had put in place for post notes was on his own personal drive, not on the Metropolitan Police shared drive. So when it was being searched for inquest teams, they couldn't find it. It was found late in the day, and then when it was found late in the day, it was put to him. And that's how it came about. The second part was about the use of the ADAM system. The ADAM system is a computerized system which holds all of the post notes for armed officers, and he was asked a question about how often that system had been used. He gave the answer 84% of officers had accessed that system. That was correct, but he wasn't aware from his original briefing about the time period where that inquiry had been done, which was from 2012 to 2017. So again, he had to come back on the Thursday and clarify that statement. And those were the two issues in question.
Any other members? No. Well, thank you for coming along, Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Before we come to the substantial body of questions, there are a couple of questions for members on the emergency services network. Can I bring in Assembly Member Pigeon, please?
Yes, obviously this was in the news only yesterday, and we've looked at this in the Assembly before. Constant delays, complications with it, full rollout of this new emergency services network is delayed by another 3 years, so you're going to have to run and extend the airwaves contract. So I was wondering, I think the National Audit Officer said delays are costing UK police forces around 330 million annually. Wondering what you've looked at, what is the cost to the Met of basically running two systems side by side, and this new extension of airwave is beyond the existing contracts. It's going to be costing you a lot more.
Yes, thank you. I mean, clearly, let's start with the first thing. We need a radio system to operate in London. We just heard from Neil about things at the most extreme. The ability to communicate is a key bit of what we need. And part of what's going on at the moment is to make sure that any switch to a new system gives us at least what we've got now in that critical area of push to talk, i.e. when I press the button, can I actually talk to someone? That's the absolute basics with it. We are worried and concerned. This is one of those major programmes that both has an impact on our budget, but it also has a real operational impact in terms of what it does. I was with fellow Chief Constables yesterday at Chief Constables Council. This was one of the main items on the agenda about the slippage and the continuing slippage of the delivery of this system, and what can we do as a service to influence the delivery patterns. It hits us in cost in a number of ways. So through the Deputy Mayor at the moment, we've just approved the replacement of existing handsets. We've actually got to buy, so the radios officers carry at the moment are reaching end of life. Mm-hmm. We had thought we were going to have a new system, so we've had to start investing money already in replacing till we get to the new system. At some point, you're absolutely right, we will have to twin run and twin track. Mm-hmm. Realistically for us, I suspect that's somewhere beyond 2020 now, in terms of timescales, and clearly that will drive real cost into what we're doing. The other issue that I think we'll only get proper visibility on when we see the settlement in December for 1920, of course a lot of central savings across policing were built on when you get this new system, you'll get data, you'll get this, and you'll be able to take savings out of your key budget lines. Of course, with the delay, that's at least another 2 years before those sorts of savings arise. So all in all, it's an incredibly complicated picture. Delivery confidence is something we as end users, as in the police service, are pushing quite hard to say we need much better delivery confidence and visibility on this, and on where costings are going to fall, and probably more important for Londoners, who's going to be responsible for those costings.
So we don't know who will be responsible for this additional cost. One would hope it's the government who are leading on this project.
I'd absolutely agree with you, but the challenge will be if it just comes into the Home Office top slice, then it's yes, all right, it's on a different budget line, but our budget line goes down anyway.
Have you worked out any estimate yet for what this
cost
is?
Not an exact cost, because literally it keeps me until we've got a firm delivery date. And the programme for ESMCP, ESN, the replacement radio system, is still to be approved in terms of the delivery date. There is a final business case on it in circulation at the moment. Until we've got a final delivery, I'd be speculating on the numbers because they keep moving all the time.
Have you got a rough idea?
It's going to be, so realistically across the UK, you're talking England and Wales, you're talking hundreds of millions of pounds to keep dual running systems.
Yeah. You're just not sure how much of that's going to fall to London. What about the actual resilience of the system? You said you're having to replace some of the handsets. Can the existing system survive the next few years and give you the coverage that you need?
So that was part of the work that the Home Office and the current suppliers have done. I believe that involves, so the issues around a contract to continue the existing system does involve putting investment into core systems, because this is a system that's been with me for most of my policing service, so it is going to need investment to keep it going. That's why we're talking about handsets and those sort of things. But this is not where anyone designed to be. You know, we in a ideal world, we'd all have been talking about we'd be on a new system by now. Yeah. The reality is we're going to continue working with this system for at least realistically 2 to 3 more years. And there are still then some big unanswered questions that will both impact London and elsewhere. So things like, will it work on the underground?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we are not going to move to a system where we go back to having to have 2 radio systems between above ground and below ground.
And the announcement said that they're looking at phased implementation, so you can test and choose which products, part of the thing, that you're able to use and trial. Are you happy with that or not?
Well, on radio coverage, it's very hard to do a phased implementation. Yes. On radio coverage. You think of trying to manage the risks of, and these are real risks. Let's say we're running a proactive operation against a kidnap gang with firearms who are moving around southeast England in and out of London, and they've actually kidnapped and there's a threat to life, and the 2 radios don't work. Yeah. I don't know how you begin to manage your way through some of that. So how sharing works, how we allow what they call roaming coverage. So on radio, it's really hard to see how phased implementation works. We've got to work through that. But in fairness to the programme, the other phased implementation they're talking about, so they will say, as part of the deal, we've negotiated a package for data and data transfer that might be better than the current rate you're paying in Force X or Y. Take that as part of the early deal. It's also important to remember that there's a whole range of users on this system, and whilst we're heavy users of push-to-talk, for some services they use that very little, and it might be that they can take what we call silent dispatch, digital transfer, and they'll be quite happy with that. It's not a complex, I don't think it's a complex service they run, it's not a complex service in the way they command and control it, as policing is.
Okay, it'd be good if you could perhaps come back with some of the figures when you
absolutely. And it might be one, I would certainly recommend it's one you perhaps in one of your themed meetings have a deeper look at. Okay. And also, if I may, I would involve colleagues from British Transport Police and the City of London, because we often talk about the Met, but we take the great system we've got at the moment, sometimes for granted. We can all talk to each other. We don't want anything that goes back from that.
Well, I think Oversight Committee is going to be picking up some of this. Can I just ask the Deputy Mayor, last year you approved the release of 7.3 million capital funding for this project from 1st November 2017 to March 2021. Given this update, are you concerned that you're going to need to invest more funding? And I know that you have a seat on the National Programme Board, wondering when you knew that this was going to get delayed further and about any additional costs.
So I get regular reports on ESN at our investment advisory meeting that I hold. In fact, I had last week, we met last week and I had this report. I've had regular monthly reports about delays and it's a moving feast all the time about how long it will be delayed for and what the consequences are. So just for your assurance, it's something that we're keeping a really careful eye on. We do have, Mopac does have a seat on that board, which is taken up by the Chief Finance Officer, Siobhan Peters. She attends that. And yeah, I am concerned that we are going to have to invest more money because of this delay by as you've already said, it is a government-led IT project that it is causing massive delays. I'm about to write to the Minister to put another marker in the ground of the Met is not picking up extra costs because the government have failed to deliver.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick one. Craig, presumably the same problems apply to the London Ambulance Service and the London Fire Brigade?
Yes, absolutely. For any of you who sit on their oversight bodies, of course their usage of particularly voice, which is the challenging bit, is slightly different. So ambulance do quite a lot of silent dispatch and data, but in fairness to those trying to deliver the programme, there are a complex group of stakeholders. I mean, we recognise the 3 emergency blue light services, but you then get into sort of mountain rescue, Coast Guard, RNLI. The list is quite large.
And I suppose the $64,000 question is this actually ever going to work? Or is it one of those government IT projects that gets dumped after spending £1 billion on it?
I genuinely don't know is the honest answer to that. It goes back perhaps to the answer to your colleague. We as a police service need our delivery confidence raised in this. If someone keeps presenting a programme to me that keeps slipping to the right and going further and further out, I get less and less confident. I'd rather be told earlier on it's going to take 3-5 years. I don't like being told something's going to take 6 months and it's coming in 6 months, and 18 months later I'm still waiting.
But you think in the end it's potentially going to happen?
Well, I think there's, in fairness to everyone, there is a real challenge around. We are working on an older system, albeit there'll be some upgrades for it, and then you've got all the stuff around spectrums moving and things that are going on with telecommunications generally. So at some point we would have to upgrade. It's going to be getting to the point where this can do it, and particularly the bit that seems really hard for everyone is getting push to talk and coverage and building penetration, which are very technical issues, to a state where they'll work and work in reality. And it's worth reminding, and I can probably do this with sort of my age, if you like. I was here when we rolled out Airwave. You'll remember that we tried to roll it out as a police service first time and didn't get that right first time. So we've learned a lot of lessons over the last 20 years about what we need, why we need it, and why it's so critical when things go wrong.
Just as an aside, I think this issue about ESN is, the whole issue about communication is in itself incredibly worrying, and what the costs might be to the Met and the National Policing Service. But I think it's really interesting, and maybe something you want to delve into further, is that the Home Office and ministers at the moment in relation to the spending review are indicating very strongly that they are really minded to look at more national projects, and this will enable police forces to have more savings, and that's the way that the sort of direction of travel on the spending review. It fills me with a real concern, because they cannot deliver this and they've been trying for years to deliver it.
Certainly the King's Cross Fire recommendation 30 years ago was to have a system worked underground, and we've seen at Grenfell with problems of not being able to communicate within buildings.
Chair, my question isn't related to this, it's about response time. On the 3rd of October, the Evening Standard carried an article which was triggered by my colleague Caroline Pidgeon's Freedom of Information request. And it really, the story was on the S calls, which is the significant calls that need to be response in 60 minutes, that the Met was failing to reach its targets. Is there are there concerns around that in terms of that, and are monitoring arrangements? Immediate calls we're slightly slipping, but you're right to say there's peaks and troughs. If we can come back and just tell us over a 12-month period what those R-grade calls require no response looks like, so we can see that. And I think we'd welcome the other analysis about the nature of that, because of course we know there's significantly a number of crimes that don't get reported, people don't ring in. So is that something that we should be pleased about, that we're getting increased calls? It'd be interesting to see your breakdown analysis of that. So Chair, if we could have that information back, but particularly about some of the issues and the trends over a 12-month, I particularly want to see if there's been a rise in the no response, and whether. No, I just would like to see that and see what happens.
No, I'm more than happy to do that. The other thing I would suggest as well, it might be worth, when you do one of your visits, you come into one of the rooms and see it, because the other thing that, of course, you've now got to see in the light of what we call telephony, you've got to see the digital offer. Over about, slightly over 10% of all our crime now is coming in online. So you'll see how the online team are working alongside the telephone team, and it is worth seeing, because I think that presents both some opportunities but also some challenges for the future.
But I'd be right in thinking the online team, the bulk of those inquiries are going to be less I-calls.
Yes, although there
will be a
so in fairness,
small number.
As the Deputy Mayor knows, we monitor them live time, because of course you might think, well, this isn't something the police would be worried about, and doesn't require an eye, and we might look at it and go, gosh, you do, we're coming. But they are much fewer and further between.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick one. Can we also have some data in what you're providing on abandoned 101 calls?
Yes, yeah.
Because I think that feeds through into some of the crime figures. You know, we're going to be talking later on about antisocial behaviour going down. Yeah. But it may be going down because people can't get through on the 101 to report it.
Yeah, although, as I just said, it'd be worth looking at both the September and then October data. The 101 call data is getting much, much better. So the wait times are coming right down, the volume's going through. So there is much better news ahead on the 101s.
Thank you, Andrew. So if you can now turn to the main body of questions, and I'm aware of your time limitations, Craig. We've got two sets of questions. One is around tackling violence, and the other is around antisocial behaviour. A third set of questions around women in the criminal justice system has been withdrawn to another meeting. The tackling violence, we're going to do it in two sections: enforcement, which I'll lead on, and there may be colleagues coming in, and tackling violence in terms of prevention. So if I can start off with you, Deputy Mayor. Are we beginning to see some stabilization in violent crime? Because that is what the Commissioner says. And if you do agree with her, can you put those remarks in some context?
I mean, at the last PCC, the Commissioner has said that in terms of the figures, it looks like we are beginning to see a stabilisation. But she's very clear, and we're very clear, that it's totally unclear at the moment whether it is a trend. When you look beneath the figures, it does look like it is stabilising, but it is stabilising at a high level. So it really is. We're not in any way complacent. And when you look at murder figures, again, we are really, the figures, we are watching them very carefully. It does really look like we're getting to the point we're stabilising, but it's not, from my point of view, and I know from Craig's and Cress's point of view, still that isn't good enough because we need to see it decreasing. And the context of that is, I really do think that the Violent Crime Task Force and its work on the streets of London since April has had an impact in terms of the number of arrests which were announced yesterday and the number of knives that have been taken off the streets. But we aren't complacent in any way, and we know that the Metropolitan Police has to keep up that level of enforcement in order to make sure that we start to see not just stabilisation but reduction.
Brings me on to my next question, which is about the Violent Crime Task Force, but I also note your comments about not being complacent, and I think that's a message that Londoners would welcome. In terms of the Violent Crime Task Force, there are now an additional 122 officers working in the team. Mm-hmm. Is that a resourcing decision you made or the Commissioner made? And if so, how was the decision reached? Can you just tell this committee of the dynamics?
So the Violent Crime Task Force started off at about 150 officers from the Metropolitan Police, and in discussion between the Commissioner and the Mayor, a decision was taken to move to prioritise some officers from the Road Traffic Policing Command and put them into the Violent Crime Task Force. They are there on a temporary basis, at the moment on a temporary basis for 3 months, and they have been out. And I know even on their first days out, they made some significant fines and made some significant arrests.
We've got a set of questions on that, right? So, in terms, sorry, I interrupted you. Do you want to finish off?
No, I'd finished.
Right. So in terms of both of you, so why are these officers being placed for 3 months only, and how will you decide if that period should be extended?
Yeah, by all means. So 3 months, we wanted to see what impact we could have with that number of officers. Clearly, if it's having the success that some of the early signs think, then we'll look to how we would extend it. But we're also conscious, I'm sure one of your questions will be, how do you cope with pressures in other parts of the organisation? Yeah. But the reality is, it goes back to the earlier point around, we're clear, and anyone who's worked with the Commissioner, if Cress was here, she'd say, look, violent crime is the number one priority. It is the thing that Londoners are talking about, no matter where you go, in terms of doing it. That's why we put the focus around it. And it gives us enough people to have syndicates where we can make a real impact. If we said, well, we moved 20 people, in an organisation the size of London, you probably wouldn't notice it.
But I know what you said about the violent crime being the main priority right now, and clearly something has to give. But why have these officers been taken from the Road and Transport Policing Command?
Well, A, because it's a large command. So there are,
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
officers,
we've discussed some of these things before collectively. There's a belief that somewhere, sometimes there's a bucket of people sitting in a back office doing nothing that we can roll out. Sadly, that's not the case. So they're always going to come from somewhere in the organisation. It's one of the largest commands in the UK at over 2,000. We felt that this level we can deal with and we can cope with for 3 months.
So how are you managing? How is the team managing the impact of this decision, even if it's for 3 months?
So the first of all, it's around making sure that when you run the selection process, you don't do something like take everyone's accident investigators or collision investigators away and leave them with nothing. It's about making sure you pick the right people with the right skills into the team, and then it's about how the two commands work together to minimise the impact. And they do try to minimise it. You can't mitigate it completely. 122 people will be doing a lot of real work, but it is around minimising the impact.
Well, I mean, some of us have been on patrol with the Violent Crime Task Force in South London, and we were very impressed with the operation. I think I can see the colleagues nodding in support. But clearly, if these officers go back to the Road Traffic Policing Command, I mean, the positive impact, and we know the statistics, they're out there in the public, the number of weapons seized, arrests, and so on. There's a question, and this is what the public will want to know, how do you sustain the positive impact?
Well, but I think that's why, in an ideal world, we'll get to a position where violent crime is going down and consistently going down, and knife crime in particular consistently going down. This is about seeing what effect we can have by putting these extra syndicates, as we call them, groups of officers out in sustained periods of time in areas to tackle some of those areas with the existing cohort under the Violent Crime Task Force. We just haven't had the scope and scale to do. So if it's positive when we get to the 3-month evaluation, then we'll have a look at whether we can continue rolling it forward. If it's not having the impact we have, you have to change tactics and do something else.
Do colleagues want to come in? Okay, Len and then Caroline.
It does beg the question of the history of dealing with spikes in crime and appropriate action, and then we come away and then there's another spike and we have to re-establish issues. At some stage, what's the sustainable approach? And it would be quite interesting to see some of that thinking now, why we're dealing with the spike in this particular violent crime at the moment. And of course, there are variations in the violent crime that we're looking at. We're concentrating on the knife crime, and rightly so, but there's other violence in this city that needs to be dealt with in a sustainable way. My point comes on the question of engagement, really, and I suppose, does public engagement have a role in enforcement and tackling violent crime? And or you could say in police per se, fine. I'm going to give 3 instances in my borough, but I think have some resonance in other bits where I think we need the strategic thinking about what we're trying to do with that public engagement and just think it through. So even on the basics, I think we're losing our way. So in a part of my borough that's had a history of neighbourhood policing officers briefing out, it's just suddenly stopped. It's never been consistent in the borough, and I think that's the problem about that. But if there's a change in policy, how do we communicate that, or what is the policy? And that's why I say we need a strategic look at the menu that the police are using around that engagement issue, so everybody knows what the rules of the games are. Officers knows where they are, and of course, this engagement isn't soft policing, it's for a purpose. It's about reducing crime or picking up information that will enable you to do a better job. So I think that's just one level at neighbourhood policing. If it goes to the Crime and Task Force, and there has been publicity on this, there's been a series of exercises which I understand what the thinking is, which is about creating a presence. You descend in an area or a neighbourhood, blues and twos, lots of noise, and the old plethora of the specialist things that can be accessed by the Crime and Task Force are there, from armed coppers to dogs barking to everyone else. And of course, everyone comes out their doors and they think there's an incident. And actually, the response from the police is, oh, we just want to talk to you, and all the rest of it. They don't believe that. They think there was an incident. And somehow I think, there's, you're damned if you do or damned if not. I'm one of those who want you to do things, but there are times and place for that type of police presence. And yes, there's a time and place of when you do genuinely go, and the task force shouldn't be immune from that, into areas and explain what they do. And then, if they're operating in areas of woe, what's going to happen, and we want to engage on that. And I just think that where that thinking has been discussed, somehow it's not being shared, or that bigger debate with other partners that you've got.
Yeah.
And, and even elements of the local police team have not been fully exposed, because it could disturb some of the local issues that are going on and being there, as a case in point. So I just want to put that marker down with, where is the strategic discussion taken, and is it at different levels? And then finally yesterday, and I've given you notice, I'm not going to talk about the area, because it's an area of stress and I don't want to do that, where if we're all working in very short resources, you've got limited resources, therefore partnership working comes to the fore. And when people are doing activities in different areas, it's about how do we share that with others. So for instance, it came to my attention yesterday of a meeting that I think is being sponsored by Mopac, not sure at the moment, with the Met logo, in a neighbourhood area, where there's a public meeting where our own Community Safety Board doesn't know it's taking place, which is Mopac funded. The council doesn't know that it's there, and I suspect if we talk to some other police officers, wouldn't. And I think it's all very, and there's no doubt, I think this meeting is very important, but it's about how do we tell people in this area of where we're trying to work cooperatively with other agencies, what's going on and what the thinking is. And how do we do that? So I'm not moaning, but isn't it time that we get a strategic plan about engagement? Why do we want it? What do we want? And this is how it looks at different levels of the Met, covering all those issues. Because we've talked also before in the violent task force, if you've got that level of resources going into an area, and some of it is intelligence-led, how do we increase even further intelligence-led to drive it down? So I was particularly interested about information flows, not just flowing back locally, not just flowing back into the police, but who would people talk to, whether it's Crime Stoppers, whether it's the council, that we just maximise the impact that you're doing in those areas. I think your results show us that. Is there more to be had out of this with a different thinking, a different way of thinking?
Shall I begin? I'll let the Deputy Mayor do the engagement piece. I think the points you make are valid in terms of what you're doing, what you're saying. So one of the big challenges is getting consistency. And of course, what looks like consistency at the centre feels very different if you're in the various parts of London, whether it's your part of London or West London or North London. People genuinely want something quite different across the piece. It is something we're absolutely working with and alive to. So the Violent Crime Task Force is led at a sort of, a chief officer level by DAC Graham McNulty. It links in closely with the work, so we now have a commander, Mark McEwen, who leads for us on engagement. And part of the work he's doing is trying to get a proper framework across engagement, which I hope will pick up some of the points you made. How we deploy the Violent Crime Task Force, I've heard both good and bad feedback around the columns going into areas. But that's done and should be done, and I've seen examples of it, so I know this actually does happen, where you arrive and there's a local member of the senior leadership team there. There is a street briefing for people as to why we're there, what we're doing, in terms of what we're doing, and some local partners are part of that, and some aren't or haven't received a message in relation to it. So no, absolutely committed to getting that consistency right and an explanation. In relation to the change in practice in the neighbourhood team, I'd be more than happy to pick that up. We've not changed any policy, so whether some personnel have changed or something's fallen off, I'll find out for you.
Do you not think, in terms of where we are really short of resources, that we have to see that suite of the menu of at different levels of where that police engagement is taking place and what the minimum we can expect over and above that. And you know, I get the view that things can be done differently and we can have a discussion, but there's a bit about the police leadership of saying, no, this is what we can do, and this is how we do it as an organisation. If there's variations to it, that's a plus programme, but it's more about understanding what you are willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Yeah.
And that's the piece of work that, thank you for the notice you gave me that when I came in around this meeting, but that is the piece of work that this meeting is trying to support, and that's the piece of work being undertaken through Mopac with Commander Mark McEwen around what does public engagement from the police, what does it look like, what should the public expect, what is the, you know, what are the standards that you should expect, and how do you ensure that there is consistency across the Metropolitan Police, because it is, we talk about public engagement all the time, and it is so absolutely vital, not just for intelligence, but for confidence and trust and building that, you know, policing by consent. Just one little point on terms of how do you ensure there's sustainability around the enforcement around the Violent Crime Task Force and, you know, officers and Road Traffic Policing Command going through. Of course, this is reprioritising officers that we have. My answer to how do you ensure sustainability is you increase officer numbers, so you don't have to move officers around from different commands in order to prioritise violence. The Mayor's put in extra money for 1,000 additional officers. We're lobbying very hard the government to actually put substantial amount of money into the Metropolitan Police so we can sustain this really good enforcement action.
Can I just very quickly, just on the Mopac meeting, and I've given you a copy of the leaflet, it's more about that if you're working with other agencies in the area, is alerting them to that it's taking place and making sure that you understand that maybe some of the answers you get is because there are some local issues going on.
Thank you, Len. Caroline, Sean, and then Andrew, and then we've got to move on, really.
I wanted to pick up, obviously, the work the Violent Crime Task Force doing, looking at knife and firearm-type crime. We discussed earlier that the Met has a screening out policy, so you can focus your resources on serious crime. But I've just had an answer through to one of my mayoral questions, and in that it shows that 739 cases of possession of a weapon, including firearm offences, blades or points, were screened out during the last 12 months. That sounds really surprising from those figures. It's obviously a serious crime. Wondering if you can give any explanation to that.
I haven't got that.
No, I'm just flagging it's an issue. Surely I would have thought you interrogate the data in terms of screening out. It came through in just to me as a mayoral answer in the last week or so. But well, maybe you can just comment generally then. 739 cases of possession of a weapon have been screened out in the last 12 months.
I can see a scenario where you could screen something out. So someone could report that I saw someone with a weapon on the tube today.
Right.
Call it in, and we can't find them.
It could be a case like that. So you're saying it wouldn't actually be someone out there with a knife or a gun?
I genuinely don't know. I've not seen that data. So
could you perhaps look at it? I just think
by
it's
all means have a look at it.
Given we've been flagging the issue of screening out. Thank you.
Sean and then Andrew.
Just to go back to one of the points Assemblymember Duval was making about, I think, sort of chasing the spikes around, because obviously one of the things we talked to you quite a lot about was moped crime until recently, and presumably also the Roads and Transport Police Command were useful in raising intelligence towards violent crime because, for example, looking for untaxed and uninsured vehicles. I think we've had data on that before that shows significant numbers of people with warrants out against them get captured in sweeps like that. So my question is sort of twofold, really. You know, are we taking the foot off the brake as far as moped crime is concerned by the movement of these officers? And then secondly, is that part of the reason why you chose those officers, because they were already slightly more integrated with violent crime investigations?
So yes to the second one and no to the first one. No, absolutely not taking off. So the Violent Crime Task Force will pick up, because a lot of these moped robberies are violent and they're often not, and we know that knife-enabled robbery is a key part of this. So they will pick up some of those. And yes, absolutely, we've gone for officers as part of the selection process who are in that area of work already, who do some of that targeting, who know some of the people we're looking for. You've been out, sorry, I don't know if you've been out, but those colleagues who have been out will know the type of officer with the set of skills we're looking for. They've usually got a broad range of skills. They'll be very proactive in terms of their ability to do it. They'll probably bring some other specialism with them as well. They might have been on the TSG, roads policing. They'll bring a range of specialisms that assist in that area. That's exactly why we do it. Of course there's a challenge when you prioritise resources across, but I'm comfortable that we have the systems to be able to manage those sorts of risks and challenge. Longer term, so the work that we've done with the move to the BCUs is about trying to also create a proactive capability on each of the BCUs. Because going back to Councillor Vowell's point, you do need a long-term solution to this. So the work and training we're doing around officers around things like stop and search and proactive street interventions, the work around creating a proactive capability on BCUs absolutely is part of this. And then as part of the work as we prepare for budget rounds and CSR, when we talk about what are the areas of the organisation where we know if we had more money, where would you invest? Absolutely one of those debates is, would you put more money into proactivity?
Just one of the things I worry about is potentially the lower level moped type crime, so a stolen moped or an abandoned moped. Are those going to, because that seems to me like if you take your attention off those, that might contribute towards a resurgence.
No, so absolutely. So the theft of powered two-wheelers is one of those lovely graphs that goes like that, and then absolutely has been going down. Because you're absolutely right, that's the precursor crime. So I'm on that one, there's two bits that give me hope for the future. One, it's come down and continues to come down. Two, the work that we're doing nationally with the industry offers some real chances to design that crime out, as we did with some of the early days of vehicle crime. So there's a lot of work being led by Graham McNulty, who's doing some of that work nationally as well, with the moped industry about how we improve the basic security. And also some of the things that are literally just on the horizon. What will it mean when scooters become electric and you can remove things like the battery pack? Does that make it, there are some real potential that just the grasp over the horizon. So that designing out the crime, the prevention of the crime is as important for us as the investigation.
That's great in the long term, but will you be monitoring over the next 3 months just for signs of any kind of...
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Sean. Andrew.
Yeah, well, just quickly on moped crime, Craig. Chief Superintendent Raphael's had its enormous success with his proactive team in Camden, where they've really got to grips with it and it's come down dramatically over the last few months. Will you be rolling out that sort of programme and sustaining it across London? That's one question. I'll give you my other question as well, so you do both in one go. And the other one is are these comments that have been made by the Commissioner and others about middle-class cocaine-using drug crime, fueling it. So it's all making statements. What you're doing to catch these middle-class people. I don't see much stop and search of bankers going on. And why are we going to have sniffer dogs at the tube stations, which is probably a good way of catching people?
I must say I was at a meeting of 50 tenants last night in Bethnal Green, and that issue did come up.
Shall I deal with the mopeds one, and then we'll come on to sniffer dogs on the tube in terms of on the moped, absolutely. So what Ian and the team have done there is a really, really good example. Going back to your colleagues' questions around, they've seen by the rigorous application of tactics that we know work. They've seen some real falls in that. And that's absolutely what all the BCUs do in terms of the challenge around it. And they do, as you know, the Camden and Islington, they do borrow from Camden and Islington, where they've had some real success in terms of doing it, and a lot of sustained hard work in terms of that work. On the wider issue around the sort of the drugs and the drugs issue, you'll know with the rise in violent crime, a lot of people have said, go on then, what lies behind the rise in violent crime? Has society just suddenly become more violent, gone up one morning and become more violent? It's far more complex than that. And we absolutely can see links to how drugs markets are functioning and working across London that is generating violent crime both here and outside of London. So that's why we've started to talk much more about a long-term drug strategy. And part of that debate, which is probably part of the debate police cannot lead, is where do we sit on the social acceptability of drug and drug use? And it's
So what are you doing to catch the cocaine users? I think the storyline on the Archers has probably been quite helpful. But
sorry,
the storyline on the Archers has probably been quite helpful.
No, but you know, the reality is that we are interdicting day in, day out in the supply chain of drugs, both within London and coming into London. That's what we do to try and drive that down.
But what about the users? Because it's the users that are driving, too.
I think you have got a real salient point here. The Home Secretary's talked about it, the Commissioner's talked about it, the Mayor's talked about it, that there are some people who think there is a victimless way to take drugs. There isn't. You know, when you are buying drugs off an illegal market, somewhere down the line, there's violence.
And to my mind,
those that are buying drugs and cocaine or whatever type of drugs need to understand that and to take that really seriously.
But to get the message over, we've got to start arresting, prosecuting these people. And when they start losing their jobs, if they're several £100,000 a year bankers, then that message will get over. But until we start actually getting the users as well as the suppliers, because the suppliers are dependent on the users for their market, we're not going to get anywhere. So are we going to start targeting the users?
Yes, an answer will suffice.
I can't tell you we're out doing many banks this afternoon. We will go where the threat and harm is with drugs and drugs crime and chase it relentlessly without fear and favour.
I take that as a yes answer. Thank you. Now, Peter, go on, I could be fair. So
I'm amazed at the levity with which people talk about this and the laughter and everything. I mean, the fact is that these guys, these young guys, these 13-year-old kids in London, are what it seems to me from what we've talked about, are the kind of like they're the shock troops, they're the kids on the ground who basically get murdered because of these people taking cocaine and taking whatever it is they're taking. They're not all bankers, half the establishment are doing it. Probably some of your guys do it as well. I mean, the fact is that surely you as the police have actually got to really put out a strong message saying these things actually are illegal. It shouldn't be fun and sort of like laughing about it like we are, like we've been this morning. It's up to you. You say it's where you sit on social acceptability of these things. They are illegal.
Forgive me. You don't have. I know they're absolutely illegal, but you've got to change. You've got to start by changing attitudes, and enforcement is part of that. But it's also not. Police alone cannot change society.
Right. Yeah, but you can.
So police alone, we absolutely will do our enforcement. We will lock people up. We will try and get prison sentences. We will try and get custodials. But when people treat hard drugs in the way they do, I see the effect that it has on those 13-year-old youngsters. I know the effect it has on them. I open the Daily Bulletin each day to see the effect it has on people. We need everyone in society to start talking about drugs in a completely different way.
Well, perhaps you could, perhaps when on one of your meetings with the Home Secretary or something, you could suggest that the Home Office and the Home Secretary starts making real announcements and pronouncements about this. That would actually be quite useful.
You can.
People are not making. Sorry, sir. People are not making the link. I'd say the average person outside is not making the link between the way in which these 100 people have been killed this year. Right? They're not making the link between that and the supply and all these people doing drugs around dinner tables in Islington, right? So basically, that link has got to be made. Maybe you could suggest to the Home Secretary he does it.
I wonder, Chairman, it can't be right for a member to blame a serving police officer for this. This is our job. This is the politician's job. This is the Deputy Mayor's job to see that this is done.
I think the point has been made. I think.
To reassure,
the Commissioner has been very clear on this topic.
Yeah, I didn't take anything as a blame. I can assure you.
Not your point, Selby Mawaba. Okay, can we now move on? Yeah, thank you. Now, look, I'm going to suggest, Craig, because I know you've got to go soon. We've got a set of questions on violent crime around prevention. There's one question around antisocial behaviour, but we won't detain you for that section. We'll put that to get back to us as a written response. So, if I can hand over to you, Florence.
Just wanted to focus on the violence reduction unit, which obviously the Mayor announced 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, for London. And we've seen a number of boroughs, including Lambeth, have been leading on that model. So I remember visiting Glasgow back in 2012, to look at the VRU there and what lessons we could learn. And I just wanted to know how that decision to set up a London-wide one was reached, and if you think it's the right one for London, because I think some of our concerns initially is that there are many challenges across London, which we all know, but London is not Glasgow. And even if you look and drill down within local wards, local communities, a young person in Brixton sees themselves as the Brixtonian, not as a Londoner sometimes. So we do need to be careful in terms of this pan-London approach.
So in terms of the Mayor made an announcement of the intention to set up the violence reduction unit, and it really goes back to the question that Len's been asking as well around sustainability, because this is a question about not just sustainability of enforcement, but actually sustainability of ensuring that when you can get violent crime to come down and to stay down. And for me, the violence reduction unit is to ensure that there is that long-term preventative approach, learning the lessons from Glasgow, learning lessons from Scotland, but also learning the lessons from elsewhere. And you're right, in terms of those lessons have been learnt for a number of years in London and individual boroughs. When I was in Hackney, we learnt the lessons and set up the integrated gangs unit very much on that model. But you're absolutely right. Glasgow is very different to London. It isn't a lift and shift of the model from the violence reduction unit in Scotland to setting up a violence reduction unit in London. We know that London, not only is it far bigger, it's more complex, much more diverse. There are different drivers to the crime, the violence that's taking place in London compared to Glasgow. Yeah, I think those involved in violence in Glasgow at the time were a little bit older. Alcohol was a much bigger factor in that than probably drugs, and guns is not such a big factor in Scotland as it has been in London. I mean, I was talking to the current director of the Violence Reduction Unit in Scotland. I went out to a Conservative Party conference to speak at a panel. We were talking about social media. They don't have those issues at the moment in Glasgow of social media inflaming violence in the way that we do in London. So it really isn't a lift and shift, but it's a learning that lesson around what is needed to really embed a long-term strategy around violence reduction. And that's why we've taken the decision to set up this unit. It isn't to ensure there is a absolute block pan-London approach to violence, because it is different in different parts of London. Lambeth is tackling it in a different way to Haringey or to Hackney. It is to add some extra capacity, facilitation and support to those boroughs, partners and community organisations that are out there already doing a very good job, but are asking me when I go out to talk to them, where is doing it well, where's the expert advice, what more can you do to support us? And that's what that violence reduction unit is going to do. It's very much in that public health mode of diagnosing the problem, doing the enforcement, which is part of a public health approach, and then treating violence as a disease. How do you prevent it, and how do you prevent its spread?
And that's welcomed, because I think some of the frustrations when you speak to the boroughs is that sometimes they do feel that there isn't an overarching strategy across London. We all get fixated on wards and boroughs, but the people dealing with drugs, the people going out committing crime don't. So on that, what discussions have you had with individual boroughs in terms of scaling up the VRU across London, and where would you like to see the unit being placed? Is it going to be with Mopac? Who's going to lead it? Have you had those discussions, or is that still ongoing?
So before we launched the unit, we were having discussions. We had discussions with London councils and the chief executive and the lead member for London councils. It leads on community safety, and we are continuing to have those discussions, because this unit is not a City Hall imposed unit, it is a partnership unit, and I think it will only be successful if it's a proper partnership unit, not just with London boroughs and London councils, but with the NHS and the other organisations, and really crucially the community and the voluntary and community sector as well. It is a partnership unit. So now we've announced it, we are going out and having those discussions about the best way to develop it and build it. We're doing that very quickly because we want it up and running very quickly, because the problem is now, and we need to make sure that we build on the knife crime strategy and the public health approach within that to add extra capacity and expertise in working with all the partners, because it really is a partnership unit. But I do also have to say, and we were very clear, and the Mayor was very clear when he announced this, that the violence reduction unit will be able to, it will make progress, it will do that long-term intervention, but it cannot make up for the huge cuts to services, because however well partners are doing or community organisations are doing, it can't make up for the youth services that have been cut. It can't make up for the fact that in order to get into mental health services, if you're somebody who's suffered from trauma, you have to be almost, for child and adolescent mental health services, you have to be at crisis point. There's very little early intervention and prevention. We can't make up for that. The government really does need to step up, but we're doing our bit in terms of supporting, facilitating and ensuring that there is consistency of good practice, people understand what works, and supporting those that need a little bit of extra help as well.
So on that, again, we know the financial pressures facing the Met and Mopac and all range of public services. So there was an initial announcement of 500,000 attached with the VRU. Just a little bit more information about where that money's actually come from and how it's going to be spent, because I think, again, some concerns would be around if you're just looking at maybe is it going to be just spent on commissioning, is it going to be spent on additional consultation? Just it's a very small pot for a very large problem. You're saying that you still need to find out where that unit's going to sit, so it seems quite an ambitious target and an ambitious pot for a very large issue facing Londoners, and in essence, will there be any more money attached to the violence reduction unit going forward?
Just briefly, the violence reduction unit will sit within Mopac. It is initially and will be built up from within Mopac. It will be across City Hall, but it will be initially under the umbrella of the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime.
So there's capacity for it to sit within Mopac? There
will be capacity, and that's what some of that £500,000 is. I would absolutely take it, that would not be enough to tackle the problem. It isn't that there is £500,000 to tackle violence reduction. This £500,000 is to set the unit up, set some of its early work up, and also to ensure that I'm very, very keen that we have outreach workers that are out there in the boroughs working locally, engaging with people locally. That was very much for me a lesson from Scotland, and it continues to be a lesson from Scotland. So it is about the unit. It's on top of the London Crime Prevention Fund, the £45 million into the Mayor's Youth Fund. It's on top of all the other funding streams that are coming out of City Hall, and obviously also on top of the extra money that's gone into the Metropolitan Police that we've already talked about around the Violent Crime Task Force, which is there, and that is sustainable. It's there for the forthcoming future around ensuring that we continue that work.
So what would make the VRU different? Because again, we signed off some of the Mayor's crime strategy earlier this year. So, for example, we saw additional funding and additional capacity going into the violence against women and girls strategy, for example. How would that differ to what you're going to be setting up with the VRU?
The Violence Reduction Unit is building on the knife crime strategy, also building on the violence against women and girls strategy. It is a violence reduction unit. It isn't just a knife crime reduction unit. It is looking at all forms of violence in the way that the Commissioner does, looking at knife crime, gun crime, but also, I think really, really importantly, domestic abuse and sexual violence, because that is violence, but also we know from research and from case studies and reviews that they are drivers as well for getting, young people getting into violence. We look that there's been domestic abuse in the household, there's been sexual violence. So it is to cover all forms of violence. Okay. What will be different is it is extra, as I outlined previously, it is extra capacity and support to go out into communities and into boroughs to engage with them, to spread what works, do trainings, bring out the expertise and the research, and to make sure that there is more consistency across London, but not a consistency, but not necessarily that everywhere in London will be doing one particular thing, because it is, as I said before, different areas have different problems and issues. But what I have found when I have gone and discussed with boroughs or discussed with communities, they have asked me, and they continually ask, where is doing it well? What can you do to help us support this? We held the summit at the end of June this year, which was brought together every chief executive and every local authority. And it was extremely successful, extremely useful, and the feedback was that it was useful, but the feedback also was, can we do this locally? What can you do to support us locally? This unit will enable us to really take that forward, because pan-London you can only do so much. You really do have to get down into the detail, and this unit will enable us to do that.
And just lastly, before I move on, obviously we had a number of reports on the rise of moped crime, which again, the level of violence carried out by some people on those mopeds, wielding knives, shooting shots as well, has been on the increase since 2015. So it's good that the Violence Reduction Unit will be looking at a wide range of violent crime. I'm sure you saw the BBC programme on Monday on Inside Out, which focused on moped crime and a massive increase. They reported figures of over 60 thefts or burglaries or mopeds in London every day, and they actually feel that that's going on the increase. So you've touched on the areas that the VRU is going to focus on. Are we saying that they maybe drop and focus on moped-enabled crime on the back of this specific focus on the violent crime?
So I didn't see that particular programme, so I can't, in terms of the figures, but Craig has already outlined that the focus on moped crime will continue because and also the theft of mopeds because of the violence aspect in that. That will continue. What the unit is looking at is the long-term preventative measures that will stop and enable people not to get involved in violence, whether that's violence whilst on a moped, robbing people on a moped, or it's violence with a knife, or it's domestic abuse. It is about what is causing that violence, what is causing that individual to perpetrate, to carry out acts of violence. So our focus is on what works and preventing and putting long-term strategies into dealing with the reasons and the drivers for violence. It's on top of the enforcement work that the Metropolitan Police will continue to carry out. I mean, the other thing that the Violence Reduction Unit will also do, and we are doing already, but it's to build on it, is to take that, what's happening locally, but actually sometimes you need to unlock across London because, probation is a pan-London service. Local authorities and boroughs are busy really trying to influence, as are we, probation services. We want to be able to do that on a pan-London basis and to continue to do that on a pan-London basis. And the Violence Reduction Unit will enable us to put more capacity behind that to ensure that health, probation, every part of the system is prioritising tackling violence across London as well as locally.
Sorry, just one thing. I'm not sure if you came back to me, Deputy Mayor, on where the initial funding for the VRU came from, the 500,000.
So that's coming from, that's an additional Mayor's funding that will be allocated to Mopac.
Okay, thank you.
And then Len.
Yeah, I obviously want to give this time to sort of get set up and do some work before we start properly holding it to account. Just one question about independence, really. I think one of the recommendations of the Youth Violence Commission was that units controlling violence, violence reduction units who are trying to do this coordinating work potentially shouldn't be tied too closely to the police. And I think Mopac is tied quite closely to the police. Obviously, we've discussed the public health approach before with you, and you've pointed out various places in your knife crime strategy. You've been holding summits. You clearly have had staff looking at crime from a public health type perspective in Mopac before. So is it, in announcing the unit and announcing additional funding and bringing in more staff, does that mean you're also going to be bringing in more independent people into Mopac to work on this alongside people within Mopac? Because that seems to be what was slightly missing before and might be what's novel here. So can you possibly...
So there's a few things in that. We are the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime, and obviously I know a lot of people think we are only about the Metropolitan Police or policing, but actually I spend a lot of my time working with partners. I chair a knife crime executive board, which we have the local authorities on, probation, courts. So it is absolutely, Mopac works across the piece in relation to policing and crime. We mustn't forget that and crime element. The other part is, and I know that there is, we asked, in terms of the unit, it will be set up under Mopac. if in the future it would be better and more, it would be more successful, or there's thoughts around that it should be placed elsewhere, I am very happy to look at that. Because what for me matters is that it works and we do the best for London in terms of reducing crime. But I would also just refer, look at the Scotland's Violence Reduction Unit. That was set up by the police. It still is. It's just, Niven Rennie is an ex-police officer, superintendent in, I think it was Strathclyde Police. It is a number of ex-officers are in the unit. So I think this divide between you either have policing or you do public health, it's a false divide. I think you have to have both, because the police bring with them expertise and professionalism that you do need, but you also need, that's why I'm so keen that it's a partnership unit. I absolutely accept you need to have other experts, other professions in the unit, and part of our discussions with health, London councils, is how do we bring that expertise in, and who are those people that can come in to do that.
So when will we hear more about the structure of it? Because one of the things that's been brought up is a whole London approach, right? Should we have subunits? That's presumably going to be looked at. When will we see more about who's working there and what are their remits and what areas they cover and all of that?
So I obviously have my idea about what the unit should look like and the structure should look like, but for me the most important thing at the moment is to get very quickly out to recruitment of the director and to work with that person, whoever is recruited to be the director, to work with them to build it and to ensure that the structure is right. Because actually that is the discussions that we need to have with partners, and we need to build it so it's right for London. So I don't think it's right for me or Mopac to say this is the structure, come in and deliver it. It is build it quickly in consultation and in partnership with those that have the expertise out there in London.
When do you think that would be? That was my question.
Well, as soon as possible.
As soon as possible, thank you.
Working very hard.
First of all, can I thank you in terms of the approach you've outlined this morning, and I think Siobhan's right about when do we hold you to account, but there are some things that I think are pretty fundamental, and there's some crazy thinking out there, and I think you've dispelled some of it about the public health approach. It's insulting to say there hasn't been a multi-agency approach. The key issue to this is that more of the same isn't what's expected. It's a change in the way that we work and in approaches, and that actually all the organisations that have been part of this need to look at what they're doing and think about what changes that can be made. And there is a problem. There are natural things in London. They're called boroughs as units that we operate within, where you can get increased differences of approach but bringing people together, and there is a London-wide perspective to begin in, and there lies one of the problems that I've got. If in all the evidence I think we've taken as a committee and all the conversations that have taken place, education is key, one of the key issues, and the commitment to this change in the way of working is from the top. Some of the missing people here are the government, in the sense of education. And you can talk to LEA schools and get the council to say this is what we're going to do. But there are a number of schools that don't come anywhere near the LEA, and government needs to come to play an input. Because if one of the issues are, and we're going to look differently about exclusions and what happens during that process of exclusions, and are the questions, do we take people and exclude them for a long time, or do we bring them back into the system in a different way? Or in some cases, as someone said, just get rid of these units, which I don't advocate. But, in some of that thinking, it seems to me you've got to have every school to come and play. We were in the West Midlands where an academy school where the head teacher was quite clear, I'm aiming for minimum exclusions. Now, of course, there are times when pupils and staff might need to be protected and have that period of time, but that was his ethos, his whole objective about looking towards that. If we're going to get a London-wide approach, we need government to come to play to make sure that they're on board with those policies, including the health service. I thought you said a very important point, Sophie, about the mental health services and that preventative role, a timely manner to try to intervene where it's required. And I just think there are some elements that are just missing on that. And lastly, people say the public health approach doesn't say the police walk away from this. The police have got a very important role to play onto it, because they've got to also bring their preventative role that sometimes get lost on the police enforcement side, and think how we do it. And one of the issues I think in London we've got to tackle is some of the issues about reoffending and our young people, which tells me, and I don't want to be critical because people are working very hard in boroughs on it, but actually there are some youth offending teams that need to be challenged, appropriately and need to change the way they work, because clearly it's not working. So I just think there's an whole host of things, and I welcome your approach in the way that you're doing it. I don't think it's a silver bullet that's going to deliver it instantly. It's going to take time, but I think we shouldn't lose sight. It's about saying that it is about a different way of working that for individual organisations and collectively how we bring this to bear on the crisis we face.
I couldn't agree with you more, and in terms of I absolutely agree with you, but in terms of the government's role, totally agree with you on education. That's one of the reasons that we've been engaging and working with Ofsted very, very closely. They've got a thematic review coming out probably in the new year around schools' approaches to knife crime, and it's also why the Mayor wrote to the Home Secretary in August asking for new powers and duties over partners to tackle serious violence. I'm really pleased he's followed suit this week and announced that he's going out to consultation on that.
Good.
Thank you. Because of the ongoing importance of this issue, I did give members leeway in terms of the time that they wanted to make their contributions. And thank you, Craig, for staying on.
Thank you.
Because I do know you want to leave just after 11. However, no, you can't just go. Before we move on to the second part of our meeting, I would just like to thank you, Craig, Sir Craig Mackey, for attending today. I understand that this is the last of our meetings where you will be leading for the MPS.
Essentially, yes.
And I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the committee to pay tribute to you for all the work you have done since you became Deputy Commissioner in January 2012 to keep Londoners safe. Not just Londoners. You have had a very distinguished career in policing over the last 34 years, having been Chief Constable of Cumbria, and also you played a pivotal role in national policing. As Acting Commissioner, you also oversaw a period of transition and dealt with a range of serious issues during that time. I personally would like to thank you, as someone who's been on this committee for 2 years now, for your openness and willingness to answer our many often challenging questions on diverse policing matters at a monthly question and answers, and indeed in other forums as well. I would like to wish you a very happy retirement in December with your family. I know that other members also want to say a few words in tribute, so I'd like to invite representatives of each of the political groupings on this committee to say a few words. If you can start off with you, Caroline, and then followed by Sean. Then I think as the ex-chair of the MP, I would like you to say a few words, and then and Tony.
I hadn't really properly prepared anything because I thought, I'm sure I'm going to see you at some point between now and December. But
To reassure you, Chair members, I'm hoping that I will see you. I probably won't appear before a committee again. We hope to make an announcement about my replacement.
Appear again, we'll give you a second round of tributes.
Very.
No, thank you. We've already discussed this and I've bumped into you outside, but thank you for all your work, and you've been great to work with all the time you've been Deputy Commissioner, and I've certainly enjoyed working with you and your openness in answering things. So thank you and enjoy your retirement, but we don't really want you to go, as you know. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you too. I can't recall when you've ever tried to actually avoid a question, so that's really good. If you can pass on some of the similar advice about how we are a friendly committee and people should be open with us to your successor, that would be great, and we will be seeing you again. So.
I'd like to echo all that and say there have been some robust exchanges here over the years, and the way that you've conducted yourself and interacted with this committee, we should say thank you to you. I think that I can't think of an unprecedented period of difficulty that Met has gone through that you've been there, and it's good that you've been there and you've made a difference, because I think without you we might have been in greater difficulties than where we are, and I think you've made a great contribution to the Met and a great contribution to the safety of Londoners. It's a difficult job, as we know, but I think we owe you a great deal of debt of gratitude with that. So I just think we ought to say that, and quite frankly,
Thank you.
Tony.
Well, very briefly, if ever I was to be asked for a definition of safe pair of hands, I'd say Craig Mackey.
Thank you.
And thanks for that.
I think we should
That's nice.
Thank you for all those tributes.
Chair, I think we should clap Craig,
Yeah.
and I think we should stand to do it. And I think, because your service to us, and it's the last time. Thank you.
Thank you. You may now go.
Chair, I couldn't let that go unsaid. I'd just like to thank you and all of the members, and I certainly send that to members who can't be here today, and I'll get the chance to thank them personally. You've always treated me with dignity and respect. I hope I've shown the same to you. I'm very proud of what we've done collectively for London. I'm very passionate about London. I'm very passionate about policing. And thank you, and I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig. Thank you.
Get to go home early.
So, we can now... Yeah. Space.
Oh, yeah, see you.
If I now ask Rebecca Lawrence and Sean Peters to come to the table. The Deputy Mayor is going to stay on for the second part of our question and answer, which is going to be on Mopac's annual report. Right. Right, thank you for attending, Ms. Lawrence and Ms. Peters. We have a number of questions to ask you, starting off with Mopac's administration and spending, and I'll hand over to my colleague, Sylvia Marber. It's your turn now.
Thank you so much. Really, these are questions for the, initially, for the Deputy Mayor. I took great pleasure in reading your report. And I really wanted to sort of compare and contrast a Mopac report and the way Mopac operates compared to the MPA. Within your report, there are 3 lots of statistics which relate to my patch, which shows my patch in a very bad light. I'm not suggesting that they're wrong, because these are statistical facts showing things like the declining rates of sanction detection, the increase in various kinds of crimes, and the delay in answering various calls. I have to say to you that Mopac, I think, takes pride in, if you like, being the kind of invisible force behind the democratic answerability of the police. And I think that we actually specify, and I've got the phrase here, that the democratic accountability mechanism of the police is exercised through this committee, through you, Deputy Mayor, and through the Mayor. In the old days, if I could call it that, under the days of the MPA, if a bunch of statistics was going to be released which reflected on a particular part, a geographical part, of policing in London, the appropriate Assembly member would have been informed, would have been apprised of this, and these things would have been drawn to his attention. And those of us who have memories of the MPA will know that, in fact, there would have been a member of the MPA staff who we would know, who would deal specifically with any difficulties which will be flagged up to us before, if you like, they had a public outing, as they have had today. And that appears to have gone. And I say this, Deputy Mayor and Rebecca, really in sorrow rather than in anger, that that link has gone. If we are to be part of the democratic accountability of policing in London, which I think is defined in one of your documents, this is an occasion when it should happen. Anyway, after taking you to task on that one, I'll stick to the questions that have been assigned to me. And this again is due, Deputy Mayor. We're now halfway through the mayoralty, and 2 years into your tenure as Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, what do you see as your successes, and what areas are there where you need to do better? I think that's probably a patsy, really.
Might have thought you might have. Just can I just pick up on what you're saying about the glory days of the Metropolitan Police Authority? I'm sure it was incredibly good, and in terms of accountability and democratic. But obviously, Mopac has been in existence for a number of years now. A lot of the information that's in this annual report, you will know, is on the Mopac website and is on the dashboard, and it is regularly updated and goes down to ward level. If, you know, we can send you links if that would make it easier for you to find, but it is absolutely out there on a monthly basis and also is reported to you as a committee regularly as well. In terms of, you know, we're 2 years into this mayoralty, we're 1 year in...
Please forgive me on that point. Once it's on the web, once the thing has been published, it's published and it's out there for everybody. The point I was making was that we would have been warned, we would have known, because once a thing is out there, people ask us about it. And indeed, I have seen criticism of what has been happening on my patch, exercised by a political party, which is represented here, when, in effect, I was blindsided. If I had known beforehand, I would have been able to make a riposte.
I'm very happy to let you know and give you a list of the publication dates of our quarterly reports, and when, you know, in terms of, and send you the link and send all members, Assembly members, the links to our dashboards and how regularly they are updated, so you're aware of that, aware that that is a regular occurrence, that these figures, as with Metropolitan Police figures and ONS figures, are regularly updated. In terms of, you know, what's next and what in terms of achievements, it's 2 years into the mayoralty, 1 year into the police and crime plan. Am I satisfied with where we are? No, I'm not. How can we be satisfied? And we've had this discussion on previous occasions when violence is at its, you know, is where it is at the moment in London and across England and Wales, that we are seeing increase in crime. It is a difficulty that's which, in terms of what's happening in London, is mirrored outside. It gives me a small degree of comfort that it's mirrored outside, and in some cases, actually, when you look at crime, in terms of particular, you know, burglary and burglary, we are actually, the Metropolitan Police and London area it is increasing, but not at such a fast rate as outside of London. In terms of things that I am proud of and pleased that we have, in terms of what Mopac has delivered for this mayoralty, we have delivered 2 dedicated ward officers. We've reintroduced and restored neighbourhood policing, which is incredibly important and is the bedrock of policing. It's, as you know, a system which goes from neighbourhood policing right up to counter-terrorism. So I am really proud of the fact we have gone quite some way to restoring real neighbourhood policing. Do I want to do more? Would I like to do more? Yes, I would. But we are constrained by the number of police officers that we have because of the budget that the government gives us. So that is a frustration for me. In terms of the work that we are doing around violence, we've clearly have a long way to go. Setting up the violence reduction unit will be a key part of the work that we need to do. But we have put in place some extremely good programmes and projects which I believe will begin to make a difference to Londoners. The funding that's going into community projects around tackling violence, the money that's going into accident emergency unit and expanding the number of accident emergency units that have youth workers in. I'm very, very pleased that that's happening, and I really do think that will start to make a difference. And in terms of victims and the work that we're doing on victims, I'm really proud that London is the first area that has its own independent victims commissioner. Claire Waxman has already made a difference in focusing on the work that not just the Metropolitan Police does, but the rest of the criminal justice system does in ensuring that victims are put absolutely at the heart of what they do. I think that's a real significant step. Not only have we appointed a really professional person into that role, but we have also increased the money that is going into victim services. So we are increasing and improving the services that will that support and enable victims to cope and also to recover.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think the very first thing you listed as something that you saw as a success is, I think you phrased it, real neighbourhood policing. But again, if I look at your report on public perception and public satisfaction, that is in fact an area which is declining. How are you going to, and maybe that again is part of the democratic thing that I was talking about. You know, it's our job as well as your job and so on. Could it be perhaps that Mopac itself, as which now, as far as I can see, seems to be substantially a commissioning body, ought to be perhaps be more, I don't think upfront is the correct phrase, but I think you understand what I say when I say upfront about, let's take neighbourhood policing, that in fact it really is here to stay, and there really is going to be no abstraction, and that is going to be one of the things that you're going to emphasise. Certainly, according to your report, that isn't happening.
So in terms of neighbourhood policing, I am pleased that we have managed to get 2 dedicated ward officers per ward in London. That's 629 wards that now have 2 dedicated ward officers. I don't think that's, I would much prefer to have more officers dedicated to their neighbourhoods in the way that we used to have. But as I said before, we do not have the number of officers to enable us to do that. But I think it's really interesting what you say about accountability and transparency, because I think that we have really made progress on accountability and transparency, because certainly when I was a local councillor and the dedicated ward officers were being abstracted, there was no way of holding the Metropolitan Police to account for that happening. You would hear about it, but you didn't know exactly what was happening. What you see in this report and what you will see in future reports and on the dashboard, the Mopac dashboards, is absolute transparency around abstraction for dedicated ward officers, that is not only being tracked, it is being published down to borough level, that you can see what's happening. And I think that gives you as the Police and Crime Committee a much better handle on what's happening in London, but it also gives our local partners, our boroughs and the community and residents a much better understanding on why and how dedicated ward officers, if they're not in their wards, where they might be. That wasn't happening before. That is an increased transparency of what is happening.
Thank you very much. If I can ask Rebecca really 2 things. One relates to the areas of Mopac that you have been restructuring since the establishment of Mopac. And is Mopac actually adequately resourced and up to taking on the responsibilities, for example, for justice devolution? Do you have the capacity to do it and the ability to do it?
Thank you, Assembly Member. In terms of Mopac restructuring, when I came into this role, I did look at our structure, our capacity and our capability. Also looked at the, in terms of learning of the organisation's still relatively young history and the experience across 2 mayoralties of what's needed to deliver our statutory functions. And actually it was a very small and bespoke restructure, because a lot of our functions will remain unchanged across the mayoralty, but I did a bespoke small restructure that kept a large part of its functions continuing as business as usual, so that we could deliver the police and crime plan and the large programme of work. But there were a small number of areas where we looked at capacity. One was on the skills and expertise we needed around commission services, and we had a very good internal audit review which made some recommendations about additional capacity there on contract management. So we created 3 additional posts there. We did some minor reorganisation around the work that we do on the core private office, support to the Deputy Mayor, support to briefings and meeting structures. And I think in total there was a net increase through that restructure of 3 posts. There were 3 posts deleted, 6 additional posts created, a net change in 3. So it was very small and bespoke. But there's a more significant question which you raise, which I thank you for raising, which is, of course, the growth in our commission services, of which I think we're really proud. And in that, as we're successful in creating, in attracting more funds, be it Home Office transformation funds or our co-commissioning with other London partners, we bring into Mopac time-specific posts to support those strands of work. So we have a mixed staffing model, and that does allow us to have capacity. Are we happy with Mopac capacity? The Deputy Mayor and I discussed this on a regular basis, and we look to be very dynamic where we think there is the need for more capacity. The balance reduction unit that you've discussed just previously is one such mechanism, and I think it's shown we are pretty dynamic to changing need. But it is a really good question that you raise, and I do think we need to be mindful when we look at the size of Mopac relative to the size of the city and reflected to the size of the police force. We're actually quite small in our core staffing budget compared to some quite provisional information I've seen from the other side, Office of Police and Crime Commissioners. But we do, I think, have models, and we do have the structure through that very bespoke restructuring, I think, that allows us to flex and surge in that way. But it's one we've got to keep under constant review.
What about your capacity for taking on additional responsibilities?
Yeah, I'm pretty.
Okay.
I mean, I've got a very flexible and creative and dynamic senior team and staff base, but it is something that we are vigilant of. I'm very satisfied with Mopac capability. Capacity is the issue that we look at. VRU is one such example of surging more capacity in.
But if you take, we are taking on additional responsibility because of recent changes to complaints, for example. Yeah. So probably from April of next year, Mopac will be taking, it just depends on the timing, it will happen, we'll be taking on additional responsibilities of taking it, of dealing with appeals for complaints. So we are working now on that transition to ensure that we get the right proportion of budget coming down to us, and also ensuring that we have the right level of staff building up in order to be able to deal with the complaints that will be coming in, not complaints about Mopac, but complaints about the usual complaints that are coming through. We will be dealing with appeals, as will every other police and crime commissioner. We have a team working on that transition, working with the Metropolitan Police and taking advice from the IOPC as well. So we are, where there are additional responsibilities and duties coming online, we are on top of that. We are looking absolutely to what that means in terms of capacity and budget to ensure that when it does come online, we are ready for it. But it does also mean that when you look at the figures, you also need to look at where those additional responsibilities and capacities have come in because of changes to legislation and duties and responsibilities that are being placed on police and crime commissioners.
Yes, I've no doubt that we do take our responsibilities seriously in that context. Can I say that there is a suggestion that there is a scattergun approach to sort of the things that you are financing, that Mopac is financing, where they are working with other bodies who, and so I've got a comment here from Lambeth, which talks about lots of different organisations funding the same thing, and therefore that there is duplication. Might it make sense, even if Mopac doesn't take the lead, but there should be some financial sort of bod who is seeing that money isn't coming in from multiple sources to be spent on the same thing. It would be infinitely more sensible if there was one person managing all the funding streams which are going to be spent on the same object. Or perhaps this is a myth. I am told that the person who knows all about this is... Well, it's your colleague. It's obviously Siobhan.
So I think that some of the more established funding streams are very mindful of the need to let boroughs in place coordinate the funding that's coming to them. So the single largest funding stream that we have is obviously the London Crime Prevention Fund, and boroughs play a very big role in deciding how things should be funded locally. I think what you have seen this year is a number of new funds being created by different bodies, and some of those are very much in their infancy. Some of them are entirely out with our ability to control the timescales that have been set for bids and so on. We, though, work very hard where we can to join up those bids. So the new funding streams that are coming out, the Home Office Early Intervention Fund has been set up with some ambitious timescales. I agree with you about the importance of coordination, and we can play our part in that. I think some of the early thinking about the role of the Violence Reduction Unit, because that's a popular area for funding things at the moment, is that it is absolutely right that you have somebody able to do a strategic needs assessment, able to take a view, place-based, around hubs or whatever, of the services that are being funded in those areas, and really build up that understanding area by area of what is being funded, where perhaps there is duplication, where perhaps there are gaps. But that is quite a complex job to achieve across the whole of the funding landscape in London, where you've got very many people who are active in this. So,
thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, just to be cheeky, just to add one last thing on that. In terms of different funding streams, I argued with the Home Office to delegate down the Early Intervention Fund to Police and Crime Commissioners for exactly that reason, because there are too many streams going into local communities. But I wasn't successful, and they've done it in a different way. So where we can, we always make that argument, because I totally agree with you. You know, it is very difficult for local communities and voluntary organisations if they are having to bid to all sorts of different funders. We're making that argument. You could help us make that argument to the Home Office in terms of future funding rounds like the Early Intervention Fund.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. If I can just go back to the Deputy Mayor for something you said earlier about numbers of police officers. Approximately how many do we have at the moment?
I think we are on 30,950. Sorry, 29,650.
I was going to say that.
Sorry,
really
that's in my dreams. That's in my dreams. But I wish we were. But 29,650, I think we're on.
So
I can absolutely double check that for you. But
so there's funding in place for another 1,100.
There is the money that the Mayor has put into the Met from business rates will give an additional 1,000 officers than would otherwise been afforded.
Okay, I mean, because it's a constant complaint, there aren't enough police officers. So how long do you think it's going to take to get the police officers that are funded?
We are and I have regular six weekly meetings with the head of HR and workforce at the Metropolitan Police. We are absolutely focusing, and they are focusing on recruiting police officers and bringing them through as quickly as possible. They've made changes to the way that they have that changes to the way the pathway from when you first apply to actually getting out onto the street. They've shortened the amount of time that can do that takes. It's less than 9 months now. Absolutely focusing on it. We hope to be up above 30,000 in the next couple of months. And then, as you'll know, last week the Commissioner launched the new recruitment drive for police officers to get us the additional officers that the Mayor has paid for.
I see all that. I'm just concerned. Some people are constantly complaining we haven't got enough officers. The money is in place, so it's down to how quickly.
So the money is in place for the additional money that the Mayor has put in will ensure that we have an additional 1,000 officers. We are out to recruitment on those officers. The money is not in place to ensure that we have the right and enough police officers in London. The Mayor has put more money in, but we need extra officers on top of that. That is the responsibility of the Home Secretary in his arguments with the Treasury.
So you think in 6 months' time we should be up to 30,000?
We should be up to 30,000 and going up above that to the additional 1,000 officers. Do I think we should have more than that? Yes, I do, but we don't have the money because the Home Office grant to the Metropolitan Police is not sufficient.
Well, I would say though, if we did have the money, clearly it's taking a long time to recruit in any event. So
we are recruiting at the moment.
Money isn't the answer, I think, is what you said. Thank you, Chair.
The members.
Yeah, I wanted to come in. Have we moved on to the financing, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah. So one area that I wanted to touch on was around the additional projects and officers that Mopac fund. So you'll be aware of the Met Plus Police scheme, which Mopac funds with a number of their bids across London. And my understanding is that there are now a few budgetary constraints, and Mopac are looking at discussions with the various bids in terms of the future of those additional officers. Could you give me any updates on that, please?
It's Met Patrol Plus you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So there are some There's some difficulties around the number of police officers in place at the moment. The local borough commanders are having discussions where there are schemes and there are officers that are being paid for by local authorities. They are having those discussions with them locally and making those decisions locally based on operational need where the officers go. I'm in discussion at the moment with Martin Hewitt around the future of Met Patrol Plus. I'm very clear it has produced very positive results for boroughs. It's a really good partnership approach in terms of local authorities working with, not just around the number of officers that they buy or don't buy, but actually that partnership approach in terms of that understanding what is happening locally and both working together.
No, and totally agree with you, and I'm glad to see that you do recognise the value that they play. So you'll be aware that locally in Southwark, after the terror threats, the Southwark bid actually increased their funding to support 2 new officers. So there are real concerns around the fact that the value of what they're doing locally may not be seen in the realm if Mopac had just taken that decision. So on the short to medium term, what do you see their future to be from a Mopac perspective?
So I'm having those discussions at the moment with the Metropolitan Police around the future of Met Patrol Plus. I am really clear that it is a really positive, valuable contribution from local authorities to enable that partnership working, to enable local priorities to be focused on. I'm really clear about that value. It is a local authority scheme. It's not a business improvement district scheme. They aren't buying officers. They aren't funding officers through the Met Patrol Plus, because Met Patrol Plus is the buy one get one free scheme. There are bids, and that might be what you're looking at, that are buying individual officers. It is a slightly different. It's still additional officers, but it's slightly different to Met Patrol Plus.
Because would you not be concerned that if we do see a removal in these additional officers, that we could something that was floated in the news last year around private policing, and we could see a situation where in some areas we're seeing a 2-tier level in terms of policing. So it is important for Mopac and the boroughs. I totally agree that you're saying that it's a local decision for the individual borough whatever they're called now. But I think it would be good to have that sense of direction coming from Mopac and yourself to say, actually, there's value in these officers, and we're not leaving you, BCUs, to take your own individual decisions. So some guidance on why they're important.
I'm really clear that in terms of in the very, very short term, whilst officer numbers are below 30,000, there are some individual discussions to take place between those boroughs that have invested in Met Patrol Plus. I'm trying not to say bought police officers because it just sounds really crass, but have invested in Met Patrol Plus. There needs to be some local discussions around what is the priority in the very, very short term. I'm really absolutely clear that I think Met Patrol Plus is really, really valuable in terms of what it brings to a local borough, what it brings to the partnership, and what it brings both to the borough and the Metropolitan Police. I'm having those discussions at the moment with the senior levels of the Metropolitan Police.
Thank you.
Any other members? Yes, sorry.
Questions for Siobhan already. I wanted to ask about reserves and where you see them going over the next few years.
Reserves for the Metropolitan Police overall, or those? So we have some very strong plans overall to use our reserves, invest our reserves wisely. So those reserves that are earmarked will be used to support the transformation, particularly the uplifts in IT and addressing the kind of digital technology debt that the Met has got. Those reserves that are there for an enduring purpose, we have assessed the kind of level at which those reserves should be maintained, and we would see those going out at a prudent level into the future.
So what percentage of the Met's budget do you regard as a prudent level for general reserve?
So it's between 1% and 2%. That level is set bearing in mind that the Home Office stands behind us to some extent with special grant, and where the Home Office will pick up a special grant instance which are more than 1% of a force's budget, but the Home Office have the right, or have the custom and practice of being able to turn to a force to say, if it's less than 1% of your budget, we expect you to be able to deal with that unexpected event. Now, with the counter-terrorism events with Ground 4, they have provided special grant for those. But it is always a discussion, it's always an application and a debate, so it is always very, very important that the Met has its own reserves, because that's the expectation, that we will be able to respond to the unexpected.
Yeah, it does sound quite a low percentage compared to what local government's supposed to maintain, for example.
It is, but the Home Office stand behind us in terms of the ability to make a special grant application for events that are above 1%.
So you're using the excess, I'll put that in a neutral sort of way, of the general reserve to meet police officer pay and so forth. Is that a prudent way of using reserves?
So, no. What we're doing, we are using the reserves as a mechanism to provide some smoothing between budgets where money put into the budget to support officer pay exceeds the pace at which recruitment is possible. But that money is very clearly intended to provide as many police officers as possible for London for the medium term. If you budget for that solely in 1 year chunks, because of the lead times on recruitment and the uncertainties about exactly which side of which year end, which month people will start in, you can very quickly find yourself with a situation where you always underestimate and under-recruit the number of officers you can afford. So by being able to look out over a 2 or 3 year period and take some degree of flexibility through the reserves to ensure that money that's intended to be spent on officer pay can be carried forward to the following year and can be used to support officer numbers into the medium term, you get a more efficient budget to support officer pay. That's not the same thing as saying building up some historical reserve and using that in one big lump to support officer numbers. This is about a smoothing mechanism between the years which you can keep under constant review in annual budget setting.
Okay, can I go back to the relationship with the boroughs? I suppose it's a question to Rebecca. Is there a point of contact with each individual borough, or is it a points of contact within Mopac? And is there a point of contact for my borough command when it's merged? So I've got 2 boroughs at the moment. It's going to go to 3 in a new thing. How does it work in this relationship? Because I was quite interested in something Siobhan said about the single stream grants going into boroughs, because I'm not convinced by that, and no doubt you can show me evidence of where boroughs are told that you're minded to give grants to particular borough organisations to deliver something. I'm quite interested to hear about this relationship and how does it work at borough level, not at London Council's level. When you say relationships of the boroughs, do you mean London Councils or do you mean individual boroughs?
Okay. You take the funding point and I'll take the Mopac spot point, yeah.
So well, okay, it possibly in the wrong order, but Rebecca will explain that we have a single point of contact for each borough. When I'm talking about London Crime Prevention Fund, that was a consolidated bid led by the borough, so that was not about other people deciding which local organisations to give money to.
Okay.
It's the new funding streams that have come subsequently that have that wider bidding, but we do, where we are aware of external funding sources that have gone into specific boroughs, we make some effort to make sure that our single points of contact in Mopac are aware geographically. It is, though, it's a fast changing and sort of moving landscape all the time.
The change that we've also done in terms of the funding that's going out to local authorities and boroughs, or it's going, like our community seed funding is going straight to communities, is that we tell the local authority what's happening. Previously, they would find out because they know what's happening in their borough, but actually we take steps to inform them and to take some advice from them as well. So, with the Mayor's Young Londoners Fund, we were very clear on the application process that we may ask the local authority, but we will certainly, if they were successful, tell the local authority that they are based in, that this is the money that's flowing to them. So you are getting that join up.
And of course, across Mopac's work, there's multiple layers of contact with local authorities. So we coordinate with heads of community safety on London Crime Prevention Fund. We'll coordinate with protective security advisors on counter-terrorism. We'll coordinate with local funding on violence against women and girls services. And then we have a SPOC system, single point of contact, within Mopac, where there's a Mopac officer allocated to each borough who can then signpost to the parts of work either in Mopac, in the Met or in other partners that are relevant to that local area.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'll come in here. I wasn't really going to ask this question, but in light of the meeting I went to last night, Deputy Mayor, which was on antisocial behaviour in Bethnal Green. Now, you touched on the Victims Commissioner's role and the impact that Claire Waxman is making. And I met her a couple of times, and she's coming to this committee next month.
Next month.
Now, I don't want to go through my diary, but tomorrow night I have a meeting on ASP in Stratford. Next week on the Isle of Dogs. You know the situation for yourself in Bark and Dagenham, and it's ASP. Now, I don't want to push you on this point, but the committee did make a recommendation, and in light of the borough approach, what are your latest thoughts on our recommendation was to expand for funding that reflects the needs of victims and to expand Mopac's victims commissioning powers to include antisocial behaviour. Now, there was no specific response to this recommendation from the mayor, but if you feel you can't answer this question, I certainly want to put on record my concerns about ASP, how we are going to fund victim services, how it works. Clearly, it's got to work at a grassroots level. You can't have a Penn-London approach. It's got to be through boroughs and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really your latest thoughts in this area about funding. At the very least, I wanted to put the concerns of, I know it's a London-wide committee of what's going on in City and East London, but I'm sure other Assembly members will tell you the same.
And just in terms of we didn't really have much of questioning around antisocial behaviour previously, but in terms of the role of the local priority setting and the priority setting that we had through the police and crime plan, because of the discussions that we had locally, we put it as a London-wide priority, the antisocial behaviour, because everywhere, when I went round with Martin Hewitt and Mark Simmons, every borough talked to us and said antisocial behaviour is an issue in this area. I know myself from when I was a local councillor that it was absolutely an issue, but it's also that issue that really impacts on the daily lives of everybody, and it can be really, really harmful. In terms of victims commissioning, it is much more problematic because a lot of the vast majority of the funding that we have, and I think around victims commissioning, is from the Ministry of Justice around specific victims commissioning. So I think it would be difficult to have that flexibility within that around antisocial behaviour. And of course, we don't have any extra money in order to take on extra commissioning, but it's certainly something in terms of what might be done in ensuring there's better support and better signposting for victims of antisocial behaviour. I'm really happy to talk to Claire, and maybe when she comes she can talk to you about what might be possible, but we need to look at the technicalities of that.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Can we move on to the next section, which is for you, Susan, I think?
To the Deputy Mayor to start with, please. Your annual report sets out what Mopac and the Mayor has done this year. Do you feel that your annual report clearly sets out the outcomes that you're achieving as well as the activity?
I think it sets out a number of things in terms of activity and outcomes. Part of the, and I'm not saying this is an obfuscation, but part of the issue around outcomes is that Mayor's Office of Police and Crime obviously has to do absolutely the best it can do in relation to influencing what is happening in London. But as you all know, there are many, many other factors that influence the key issue that we are really, really focusing on, which is crime, whether that be violence or burglary. So what I'm interested in ensuring is that the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime is doing its absolute best, and that we can have the assurances and the confidence and the framework that we know that we're doing what is right and we're doing the best we can, notwithstanding the fact that there are other factors and influences that will mean that we cannot totally ensure that the outcome that we are looking for happens. And I know you won't like this, but for example, we know that support services to enable people not to go down the path of crime or path of violence has been severely cut. We don't have control over that, so it's one of the outcomes, sort of things that is influencing the outcomes that we're trying to influence and we're trying to ensure that improve, we don't have control of. So in terms of what we are doing, yes, I do think this annual report sets out the inputs and the outputs and the outcomes that we have control over, but the absolute issue around crime and violence, it's one of those issues that we've got. We've got to make sure that we have proper scrutiny over the Metropolitan Police, that they are doing the best that they can, and that we are doing everything we can in terms of commissioning, scrutiny, accountability, and the evaluation of what we're doing to ensure that we are doing all that we can to influence what is happening in London.
Okay, I mean, some of the stuff is sort of delayed, so there are questions that come from some of the reports. I mean, in the report, I note on page 6 that you've purchased the Empire State Building, Empress, beg your pardon, State Building, I know, amazing. They will travel. I know, for 250 million. As of 31st of December 17, the building was valued by the previous owners at 220 million. So did the value of the building jump by 30 million, or did Mopac overpay?
Held us to ransom.
So that's not delayed. I actually, I didn't mention it in things that achievements of Mopac and the Metropolitan Police. That wasn't delayed. That was actually a real achievement to get that purchase of that building and the opportunity to get that building to ensure that there is a really first-class hub for counter-terrorism in London, similar to those that are placed outside of London. That wasn't a delay. I think that's a real achievement. In terms of the £30 million difference between the purchase price and the valuation, Siobhan has, we have had that audited for us by Grant Thornton, the auditors, who are satisfied with that being good value for money, but I think Siobhan's better placed to explain that.
And we set out the rationale in the published decision for it. So the 220 million is the carrying value in the books for the previous company, and is as normally those estimates are, a prudent estimate of what the company could absolutely 100% be sure to get in a willing buyer, willing seller open market transaction. In any real transaction, there are other factors that come into play. And in this case, it was a question of the alternative, which was that we would have needed to remain in the building another 5 years. There would have been at least 76 million of lease costs to pay. If at the end of that time we'd purchased the building, still, thinking of that very conservative benchmark of 220 million, actually we would have paid 76 million on top of that. So set out in the decision is the rationale and the assurance reports that backed out the rationale, and as Sophie says, our auditors have validated the rationale for why the kind of the deal price between ourselves and the seller, in this instance, the market value was quite rightly published at 250 million.
Okay, so we can read about that in the report. Okay, that's fine. The annual report also mentions the Lord Harris review on terrorism. How many of those recommendations have now been met? Because the Mopac report only goes so far. How many of them have been met?
The recommendations of the Lord Harris report, it was over 3/4 have been met. We are, so I don't have that in front of me in terms of actual ones since then that have been progressed. We are still working on the progression of that. But as you'll know, that report was not just for City Hall, it was for various other organisations, government as well as others who have responsibility over this. So in terms of those recommendations that were for City Hall, they have all been met. Some of them have not been progressed and they lie with the government or other organisations, and we are still working through those. And I chair the contest board, which meets next week or the week after next, and we are looking again at the Harris review.
It's just that, this section is about demonstrating outcomes, and if somebody's just going to the Mopac report, they're looking and they might have other questions, but that's the delay I'm talking about, things that have happened before, and I'm asking what's happened since.
I see. This is a moment in time. That's what you mean. Oh, right.
In a recent MQT, I asked about school exclusions, and I'm mentioning this because you brought it up earlier, linked to homicide. Part of the reply said that this information is often identified through the course of an investigation, but the MPS is not able to provide an accurate figure at this time. Does that mean you'll be publishing or recording this data in the future?
One of the things that the Violence Reduction Unit will do very quickly is to ensure that there is a review of all the homicides in London of young people, and a review of homicides in London to look at what the background of those individuals were, and from that I hope we will really be able to understand how many were excluded from school, what other influences and what other things that happened to them. So absolutely we are working on that, and actually it's one of the things that the Violence Reduction Unit will do quickly. It is information that some boroughs already have. One borough has done a review of cases, not all homicides, where they looked at 60 cases and they found that not one of them was in permanent education. But there is definitely a piece of analytical work that needs to be undertaken, and it is one of the things the Violence Reduction Unit will be able to do, is to really get underneath those issues such as exclusions, to really understand how much of that is driving what is happening.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, if you could answer this one. In January, you committed to publish more information that's suitable for public disclosure. So what progress do you feel you've made in this in the past 10 months?
So we've made progress on publishing. You've raised some very good questions about publishing of evaluations, and we've made progress in being systematic in where we've got evaluations that are able to be published. We're publishing those in light with our commission services, and we're committing to do that even more. We publish, we've done, I hope you've recognised that we've done more timely publication of our minutes of meetings and board meetings. So there's been, you will see the meetings, I think we discussed particularly when we met in January, oversight board and bilateral meetings with the Deputy Mayor, and of course we publish a number of meetings of minutes of our other partnership meetings, the Mayor's London Crime Reduction Board, other key partnership meetings. I chair, for example, a strategic partners group on safety and security of Notting Hill Carnival, and we've been fully transparent there in those publications.
Okay, to the Deputy Mayor then, how content are you with the speed in which the information from Mopac is being made available to Londoners?
Well, you can see in terms of Mayor's questions and in terms of letters and responses how quickly the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime is able to meet as it should be. It needs to get better at it, I'll be honest. Some of the Mayor's questions are taking too long. Some of that, to be fair, isn't the fault of of Mopac. We are looking for information that is held by other people, because we're, a lot of the questions are from actually around Metropolitan Police, and we have to get the information from them. But we do have to improve and improve timeliness, and it's certainly something that we discuss in terms of ensuring it is really important that questions are answered on time, letters are answered on time, and publications are put onto the website on time. We do have to improve on that.
I think that's what you said 10 months ago. So
I wasn't here 10 months ago.
When we spoke to Rebecca. Yeah. So,
and we are improving in terms of the letters. There has been an improvement, but it doesn't mean there's not more to do.
And our restructure has altered some of our systems. I think there's more there's definitely more we can do on process and IT improvement, and I know that Mopac are joining with the GLA in their procurement of new software and case management for correspondence, which will really, I'm hopeful, will be able to improve efficiency, because it's quite manual in terms of data entry.
So can you give us some timelines on that?
I'll have to get back to you with the timelines of the GLA procurement. I don't have them in front of me now, but the GLA are procuring a new correspondence system, of which we are a part and a user, which will actually be the first time that Mopac and the GLA have had an integrated correspondence system, which I think is a really good move and one that I was very happy to support.
I think it's pretty poor that it hasn't done it previously.
Yeah. I mean,
well, you'd have to ask the previous administration that. I mean,
I can still have a view, whichever administration.
You're right.
And we are 2 years in, and we can't constantly say that, Deputy Mayor. Final question. We've all previously raised concerns about Mopac demonstrating the outcomes of its meetings and discussions with Met and partners. Taking Justice Matters as an example, can you give us an example of an action from a meeting, how it was followed up, and how Londoners can find out about the actions taken?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
So in terms of Justice Matters, you'll know I think they're held quarterly. There's a list of the ones. I can give you 2 examples of actions that have been followed up. I held Justice Matters on looking at disproportionality and the Lammy review, and one of the things that we asked for from the Ministry of Justice, who came to that, was that they publish the figures around sentencing for London, because actually everything's national and it's very difficult to have a grip and really be able to scrutinise and try to make change, to look at what's happening. They have now published that because we have put that pressure on, and Justice Matters enabled that to happen. The second one I held was on mental health. And I think it was the Department of Health, it might have been the Ministry of Justice, came along, and they have the rehabilitation treatment orders that they were talking about. They were not going to be piloting that in London. We had that discussion at Justice Matters, and we're now continuing that discussion, and we are, I think, on the verge of ensuring that that is now going to happen in London around mental health. So those are two issues that have come directly out of Justice Matters and have been progressed. I take your point, though. I think we do need to be better at showing what comes out of Justice Matters. Yeah. It's certainly something that I am asking for, and we'll look to see, actually, in terms of what needs to go onto the web after Justice Matters, as these are the points that are coming out of it.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, can I ask you, because it seems so unfair, all these questions somebody else always answers. What would you say was your same sort of answer as the Deputy Mayor, but a different one from your perspective?
On Justice Matters?
Yes.
Yes. So I have here in front of me the action grid of each. It's an internal product of each action that's come out of the Justice Matters meetings that's been held on under this mayoralty. And I think I would agree with the Deputy Mayor. There's more that we can do in a timely way to put material up to collate that and link to the other, link to where that action has manifested itself, be it, yeah.
Okay, that's not particularly specific. Take a different example from a meeting that where there's been action taken that you're particularly pleased.
Okay.
So something completely different.
So the Justice Matters meeting on disproportionality.
No, if you take do something completely different other than Justice Matters. Give us an example of a meeting you've had where you've been able to take action that assists Londoners, just as an example.
So I'll give an example of a meeting. Well, yeah, I don't know. The Strategic Partners Group of Notting Hill Carnival that I've chaired over the last 2 years commissioned for the first time a crowd dynamics study of the areas of Carnival that are most crowded, came up with detailed This is after a year of very significant violence in October 26 in Carnival 2016. Came up with a series of recommendations of what was needed to reduce crowding areas, with some significant partner recommendations that many people say couldn't be implemented under current structures. They involved difficulties around location of sound systems that had not been addressed for years, around route management, around transport hubs, and around carnival organisation. We implemented those, and the committee had a briefing on Carnival. For the 2017 Carnival, we implemented changes to the location of sound systems and to route management, which had an impact in terms of improving vehicle flow, but there were issues around event management of Carnival, which meant that the Metropolitan Police's requirements were not fully complied with. So over the course of the last year, the Strategic Partners Group that I chaired all lent in and supported the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea in an expressions of interest process to change the organisers of Carnival and to improve compliance with the partner recommendations around how Carnival was managed. I held my debrief of that Carnival last Friday, and the positivity from all statutory partners of the changes that the event management company the community organisers have been able to make in terms of route planning, in terms of coordination with sound systems, in terms of compliance with security requirements, in terms of dynamic assessment and the scene, was hugely positive. And the results that we saw was in Carnival 2016, I'm sad to say, there were 17 incidents of serious violence, with 2 that were critical and life-changing injuries. In 2017, there were 5 incidents of violence, and this Carnival there was 1 significant incident of violence needing someone to present to hospital. And the changes in the planning mechanisms partners recognised led to that.
Okay, although we must, as it's this
and the minutes
panel, we must say there were 30 police officers, 34.
Absolutely, it still remains a very, very challenging event to police, and it's London's biggest policing operation and London's largest street carnival. But I think that in terms of the role of Mopac in coordinating and bringing partners together to create changes in what has to be a community-led event, I'm really proud of, and all the minutes of those meetings are published.
Okay, thank you.
I must say that the event liaison team's offices that you, Rebecca, you attended on the site itself. I think we spent about half an hour there. I was very impressed with the way the different, it was the person heading it was a very experienced ex-London Fire Brigade officer.
That's right.
So having seen the briefing both at in Vauxhall, in South London, and then seeing the on-site briefing, but the way that different agencies were working together, I really was impressed. I think I put that on social media as well. So thank you for inviting me to that briefing. The last section,
buzzing,
case study. Sorry.
Yes, it was a buzzing coordination hub, it really was.
Case study about the police service for London, and yours, Peter. And I'll come in later as well. I've got a couple of questions.
This is for the Deputy Mayor, but I have a feeling that you've possibly asked and answered this in a number of different ways already. But anyway.
Try again.
What is your... Yes, I think Tony actually asked you. Anyway, what's your overall assessment of your success in delivering a better service, a police service for London? I hate that, police service, police force, right? What is your overall assessment in what you've done? How successful do you think you've been?
It's like being in a job interview.
I know. That's why I did sort of apologise. I was trying to inject something.
Do you know,
what are your weaknesses?
Well, I'm not telling you that. I genuinely, at the end of 4 years, I will feel I've been successful if I've managed to, if it's going back to what I was talking about before, I will feel I've been successful if I am confident that Mopac has done everything it could have done to ensure that London is safer. Now, 2 years in, London is in a difficult position. Violence is a real issue. Crime is rising in England and Wales and in London. So I find it very difficult to talk about successes or things I'm proud of. But what I do think we've done, and I've done, and Mopac has done, is enabled that statutory responsibility around scrutiny and accountability and holding the Metropolitan Police to account. I think that has become more robust. And I think that is important because that's the role of the Police and Crime, one of the roles of the Police and Crime Commissioner that I have delegated down to me from the Mayor, in terms of that scrutiny, accountability and ensuring the effectiveness and efficiency of the force that you're overseeing, the Metropolitan Police in my case. I think that has become more robust and more accountable and transparent. So I am pleased about that. And I think the Metropolitan Police, in terms of that not just being an exercise, I think that has brought extra, there is additionality in the discussions that have taken place because of that. And I think that is an important aspect of my role and the role of Mopac. So it might be a little bit difficult to absolutely pin that down in terms of individual acts that has happened. But I think, and I know the Commissioner feels that the Metropolitan Police is held to account and is held to account in a number of different ways via Mopac and via this committee. I think that is important because it is such an important public service. The police force, it obviously can use enforcement, it can use its powers, and it is so important that democratic accountability and that democratic transparency is there.
Joking apart, I mean, where do you think there has been least progress? I mean, looking through this report, the annual report, Tony again's already nicked my lines, but anyway, it says, victim satisfaction with police service decreased. Public perceptions towards the Met decreased, gone down. Inequalities amongst that satisfaction also gone up, sort of so it's bad. This is not really great, is it? I mean, if these are the things that were kind of, if you like, or aims or whatever, and they're not happening, are they?
So where I think there's been the least progress and that I am most frustrated at is that actually we know what needs to be done, we know what could make a step change, and it is around funding. And that there has been least progress in that, and that is not from the lack of trying or the lack of will or the lack of effort or the lack of energy. It's because the government isn't listening. I genuinely believe we would have made much better progress in bringing violence down, dealing with victim satisfaction and dealing with all the other issues that the Metropolitan Police as well as Mopac is trying to deal with. We would make much better progress if we weren't operating under austerity. And I genuinely believe that not just in relation to the money that's going into the Metropolitan Police, but the money that is going into local authorities, that's going into the health service. We are battling, we are doing the best we can, but in terms of what is happening out there, it is really, really difficult, because the services that we need to lean, as Rebecca talks about, lean in, or the services that we need to support crime reduction, to support victims, they have been cut. Some of them are at the brink. Youth services, some boroughs only have 2 youth workers, and some have very few, fewer than that, youth workers out there engaging with young people. That really, really matters. So in terms of real frustration and progress, that's what really frustrates me.
Do you think, 2 questions really for you, Deputy Mayor, really. Do you think it's possible that you personally could be more visible in your role?
I'm sure everybody, of course.
No, but this is a very important thing, because basically in this epidemic we've got of violent crime, no one would suspect your profile is low, and I think it should be higher. Why is it not higher?
I think in terms of profile, I think it's very clear that myself and the Mayor are taking leadership over this in terms of what we're implementing. I am out there all the time discussing with communities and ensuring that we're engaging with communities. In terms of profile, I'm not really interested in my own profile. What I'm interested in is making a difference and making that impact. If it is important that the Deputy Mayor has a profile, I'm certainly out there and we are doing what we can around that. But what is really important is leadership, and the Mayor and myself are showing that leadership, especially in relation to reducing violence.
No, I mean, couldn't agree more about the substance of the thing. But the thing is that leadership as well is actually about being visible. And, one of the main problems we've got with the Mayor when it comes to things like violent crime and knife crime is what seems to be, frankly, kind of such a lack of leadership and visibility. It would be nice to see someone. You might ponder that.
I'm going to have to say that I don't agree with you at all that the Mayor, in relation to the Mayor has shown absolutely leadership in terms of the money he's putting in, leadership in terms of the amount of time he's out there engaging with communities, and leadership in terms of ensuring that he's standing up for Londoners. Nobody, and in terms of his profile, absolutely people understand that he is taking leadership around violence reduction. It's why he's setting up the violence reduction unit. This is why he published the knife crime strategy last year. He is absolutely taking that leadership.
Well, okay, we can debate that. This is sort of leading on to my second question, really, but I just would like to know, you are the Deputy Mayor, after 2 years doing the job, police numbers are down. We all know why they're down, because these people, the Home Secretary, cut the police force down. That's right, that's why they're down. How many police should London have? I know that sounds a crazy thing. You might.
Hey.
You might say, well, how long's a piece of string? But seriously, what, as Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, what would you say London? What is the figure that you think London should have as a force? We've now got roughly 30,000.
Well, that is in terms of let's look at how many police officers New York have. And what the population of New York is, and everyone telling us that we need to
Not
learn.
Really comparable, though. But anyway.
Well, it is pretty comparable. In terms of global cities, I think New York is about the only other city that we really are comparable to. And in terms of its population, we're very much comparable to in diversity as well. But we're not, as you know,
it's just a very straight question. It wasn't a trick question.
No.
I'm just saying, would you say actually 35,000 or 40,000? That's what actually I would be happy with.
I'd be, in terms of get us up to New York standards, I'd be pretty happy with that. But I realise that that's a bit of a dream.
All right. Well, my final question is related to that. It's about the ward visibility in wards, the 2 officers in wards. Essentially, the annual report said that in December that there were 2 dedicated ward officers, 1 community support officer in each ward. That was 10 months ago, so what is the position now? What's the position now?
The position is the same. That is the commitment that there will always be 2 dedicated ward officers and 1 PCSO per ward.
Has there been any period since December when any wards lost their dedicated officers?
So there will always be some fluctuation. There's always, the posts are there, There will be times when sometimes the dedicated ward officer has moved and the replacement hasn't come in. So you may see actual individuals in post fluctuate a little bit, but there is an absolute commitment that the posts are always there and that they are filled as soon as possible. Sometimes dedicated ward officers, police officers are sick or on maternity leave or whatever. So there is a little bit of fluctuation in that, and that does change. So are there always 629 times 2 actual individuals in post? No, because it does fluctuate, but there is at that commitment. The posts are there and they are always being recruited and filled too.
So if that hasn't changed, what we're seeing from the report is that there is an increase in dissatisfaction, if you like, in visibility of these people. Now, I live in Woolwich. I can actually completely relate to that. I mean, I don't know precisely what my ward is, but never see any police. Never see a few community support officers, plastic policemen, whatever they are, around.
They're not plastic policemen. That's really unfair.
No, but you know what I mean. The people who, they're around the DLR,
So,
but almost no policemen. No policemen.
So as I said earlier, you can now track the abstraction of your dedicated ward officers. You didn't used to be able to do that. You can now see the percentage of time that your dedicated ward officer has spent working in their ward. That is new, that is increased accountability and transparency. And in relation to the public perceptions, overall, public perceptions has remained pretty constant over the last few years. What we did when we published the Police and Crime Plan is actually to make this even more transparent by dividing. I sometimes wish we hadn't actually, but because I keep getting knocked on the head on this. We divided out what contributes to that public perception figure, and what it has shown is that there is an issue in terms of how do the public know how to contact their dedicated ward officer. There has been a change to the question, and that has also contributed to the decrease in that. But it's certainly something that does concern me, and something, in terms of the meeting that Len was talking about earlier happening in his area, that is why we are doing this work on public engagement, to really understand how we can improve residents and communities' knowledge of how to contact their dedicated ward officer, what they're looking for, and to ensure that that improves. But there has also been a change in the question that's been asked for that particular indicator.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Thank you.
Peter, I think Peter's defense, Sophie, in your answer to this particular section of questions, you did say that this looked or sounded like a job interview. So, you said it yourself. Can I bring you in, Caroline, and I want to come in?
I just want to pick up a question that I understand, and you always talk about police resources, and I get that. That's always in the room. But let's think about something else. Independent custody volunteers is something Mopac oversees. You recruit them, you support them in their role, and so on. Tell me what you've specifically done to help them over the last year. Like something within your role that's not resource intensive. What have you done to support them and to improve things for those in custody in London?
So we have a team in Mopac across a small number of roles in Mopac. We have a system that supports the custody volunteers in terms of their payment, their expenses. We invite them. We have a system of we invite them to thank them for their volunteering work and bring them together each year. Would I like to be able to do more? Actually, yes, I would like to be able to do more in that. It is a very thin part of Mopac's capacity, but we provide a core service of support to these really important and significant volunteers. But I have to look at...
Do you do anything to support them in terms of their work on the ground, or to take from them some of the issues they're raising to ensure that makes changes? Can you give me an example of some of the work you've done to improve things from what they have found on the ground to improve things for people in custody?
Yeah, so absolutely we do Mopac team and then Met officers who work with the custody visitors. Of course, there's local systems whereby their messages are brought back to Met officers. So some coordination is done by Mopac, but some is the direct operational working relationship between the Met and the ICVs, the independent custody volunteers, and so their perspective. As you know, transforming custody was one of the parts of the Met's transformation programme, and so feedback from those ICVs was brought into that transformation programme strand of work.
Can you give me a specific example in the last year where working with those volunteers on the ground, something that's come up, that you've managed to make a change to improve things in custody?
I can't give you a specific example
Sophie,
now.
Are you aware? Do you meet with the ICVs?
I don't have that level of detail. I can get back to you on that.
Do you meet with the ICVs?
I have met with them. I've spoken at their conference, and I meet every year at the reception with them. Yes, I do.
Okay. Maybe you might want to review the support you're giving those volunteers on the ground, because the feedback I'm afraid I've got is not polite about Mopac. So you might want to consider that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. In terms of delivering a better police service for London, and again this came up at the residents' meeting I attended last night at Bethnal Green. About 50 people were very irate, but some positive suggestions. The 101 service, something which I've discussed with you before, and that's a common theme still in my part of London. I'm sure it's all over London, but people who are scathing. The one officer there, the one dedicated ward officer, I'll come to the fact that there was the second dedicated ward officer. He said that you're in the process of recruiting more call operators, but as I said, that's something I have to draw to your concern. What is being done to rectify the situation?
On 101, on call handling on 101. So, as you know, there was a recruitment
drive. The answer phone, the delays, everything.
Yeah, there was. No, absolutely. I mean, as you know, there was a recruitment drive about 18 months ago, which wasn't successful. Part of the 6 weekly meetings I had with Robin Wilkinson is to look at recruitment. They, by the end of this year, they should nearly be up to full strength in the call centre. In the call centre, not quite, and it will be early new year that they really will be up to full strength. But as Craig also said, one of the things that have been put in place to try to ensure that there's better call handling. It's not just about people, but it is quality. That voice recognition which has improved things, because I mean, it should have been in place earlier, but actually it is now directing people to where they need to go, and is enabling the call handlers when they need to be able to answer those phone calls. But I'm not at all. I mean, you've been raising this issue. You as a committee have raised this issue many times. It's raised with me elsewhere as well. There has been a real problem with 101. They are moving. The Met are moving through this, and it is improving. It needs to improve a lot.
I'm glad you accept the problem,
absolutely.
And that you're doing something about it. And coming to the issue of dedicated ward officers, so before I was interrupted by one of the residents. And my speech got short because he wanted practical action enforcement, which when Mayor John Biggs came, he gave them some local answers, so they were satisfied. But I spoke about Sadiq's real neighbourhood policing plan and 2 dedicated ward officers, at which point I was told that they only had 1 dedicated ward officer. Now, I didn't get the chance to find out whether that was temporary or what happened, but I was told that the second ward officer would be starting today. But there is evidence from my part of London, both ward officers going on holiday at the same time, which for me, and I said this at the meeting, suggests poor management. And people in the audience actually agreed with that, including some of the local councillors and people. So there are certainly problems. Another problem with dedicated ward officers, I don't know if I've drawn this to attention, but in Canning Town, a very popular dedicated ward officer who's built a relationship with the local community, Canning Town North Ward, he's being now taken away somewhere else. So local councillors and others actually have asked for him to stay. So there is that issue when dedicated ward officers, the real purpose is to build up the intelligence, build up links with the local people, and then for whatever reason they're taken away. I mean, Conway is allowed to say that there are some wards where people want their local dedicated ward officer to be moved. So, well, 1 or 2 wards. But I think I make the point that it's about consistency, people staying there, and building those much valued links that we often talk about, which is what is real neighbourhood policing about. It's not just the numbers.
No, I mean, it's a little bit, obviously I don't know what's happening in Canning Town with individual dedicated ward officers, but it's back to Peter's question around there is the absolute commitment to have 2 dedicated ward officers. It will fluctuate a little bit because people do leave, people do have sickness, but there is that absolute commitment to have those 2 dedicated ward officers. And obviously it is Pan London, these are local operational decisions about who gets moved on. It is also individuals' decisions as well. I have no idea about Canning Town, but sometimes there is always that balance between enabling people to really, really get to know the community long term, but also the individuals have their own wish to progress and to do different things as well. And there's always that balance.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? No. So that brings us to the end of the formal question and answer sessions. Can I thank our guests for attending today? And can we note the monthly report from Mopac attached at Appendix 1 to the report?
Noted.
And note the report and answers given by the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime and the MPS to the questions asked by members.
Noted.
Thank you. Item 7, Police and Crime Committee Work Programme. Can I ask the committee to note the progress on the work programme as set out in the report?
Noted.
Can I also flag up that the next meeting slot on 16th of October 2018 is going to be used for informal activity?
Noted.
Yeah.
Date of next meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, 31st of October 2018 at 10 a.m. in the Chambers City Hall.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that concludes the business, as I have no other urgent business.